Age of Sigmar story phase. Grab your hammer so we can clear a path through the chaos and forge our own narratives in the Age of Sigmar. Your allies in the Stargates this episode are...
Hi, my name is Paul, and can I tell you that I am so excited to talk about drop bears in Age of Sigmar? I mean, or are you telling me that koala est means something else?
That's offensive. I'm Aaron, and I'm the Saurus. Gotta love me.
Hey, I'm Phil, just along for the ride through the cosmic void here, hopping on over from the underworlds.
And I'm Eric. I'm still a dream dino shooting lasers from outer space.
You always will be.
In this episode, we cover the lore of the Seraphon Battletome. Get ready to hear a whole lot of unintelligible growling, unfathomable plans, and heads in the stars. And then if we have time after all that, we'll talk about those lizardmen. How you doing tonight, my scale males?
That's us.
Yeah.
That was a new one. Scale mail, right? That's fun. We're a bunch of dudes with
I like
scales on this. This is off to a great start. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, hey, real
right
quick,
there.
besides this, generic intro, I mean, no, there's customized every way through and through. Do you want to give a little bit of background that you were talking about the last time the four of us were together on a Battletome?
Oh, I do very much. And in fact, a lot of this isn't new. I just copied and pasted it from the first time. So we were just talking before that we started recording, or whilst we were recording, but it probably won't make the episode, in that, guys, it was the four of us, these same four, 3 years ago to the month, April 2020, talking about the last Seraphon Battletome. Man, time is a flat circle, and we are along for the ride. What are the chances? That's crazy. But thanks for,
I feel like
coming
we were
back.
all in the Orb Infernia, and time has been reversed. I'm going to make the same joke I made when we weren't recording, because we weren't recording. So it's a good joke. I'm going to use it again. Come on. I'm using it.
Yeah. You can't let those things go. They just have to get used, make it into the episode.
I'm looking on the star map now to see which moon we've been hanging out in, because there's a million of them.
There's a lot of moons on that map. But I feel like maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves. Gentlemen, it sounds like we're all doing great. It sounds like our enthusiasm in the 3 years since our last Seraphon episode has not diminished our Azerian light within us. That was a tough metaphor to get out. I'm curious, you lot, what y'all been up to? Not so much in the last 3 years, but maybe.
All right, what have I done in the hobby the last 3 years?
What have you done most recently in the hobby that you want to share with our dear listeners? We'll go in the same order. Hey, Paul, what you been up to in the old hob?
I am working on my Squiggleanch. I've been working on it for the Path to Story podcast, Path to Glory Army. I bought it, ironically, around April 2020, and I'm just now getting around to actually painting it. So
It sounds about right.
A rough pandemic, man, I'll tell you. Hey, Phil, what you been up to in the hobby?
Yeah. Not a whole lot since getting back from Adepticon, but that was, I guess, a thing that we all did. We were all at Adepticon. That was fun.
I saw got a picture.
Yeah. And working on mostly more content for What the Hex. We've got so much to do and so little time.
No doubt. See, here the trick is, Phil, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Don't do episodes like every other week, you madman. We got Davy there cracking that whip. I mean, that's true. I just laugh because I just picture him chasing people around with a whip.
I feel like he's a devotee of Slanesh with that joke.
Oh, and he does.
He does like Slanesh.
Oh, this is fun. Look at us.
Connecting the dots.
Eric, what you been up to?
Similar. Adepticon ran a narrative Warcry event. We had 40 players, and it went off like clockwork. So much fun. I made 40 new friends, frankly.
Nice.
And so if winning is the friends you make along the way, then I am winning for sure.
First,
Are you winning friendship?
40 New Friends sounds like a great name for a chamber orchestra, I'm just going to say.
Oh, of 40 people exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Then what else? We've got a Warcry event locally coming up this next week, and it's called. I don't know if it's got a full name. We're talking about the name, but everyone's bringing like really janky, crazy, kind of stupid lists, and so it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be the first tournament event that I'm bringing my 10-year-old to, and so it's going to be a lot of fun. but yeah, just kind of getting things together for that. Yeah, having fun playing more games than I am actually building models. So that's cool.
Eric, you mentioned your jank event. That sounds like a janky event that the Underworlds players are going to be doing. I think, in the relatively near future as well. It's funny that both sides of the house are doing jank events here pretty soon.
Going crazy.
Right? Am I wrong, Phil? Is that coming up? What is the little thing that you guys are running?
Well, yeah. So we're doing a thing. We're going to be recording an episode that was suggested by one of our listeners, where all of the hosts of What the Hex will be doing a affectionately named Trash Fire tournament. Because the decks are all going to be trash. But we're all doing very thematic, creative, but not actually good decks. And we're all going to play against each other with those decks. And it'll be a good time. We're going to have an episode coming up probably next few episodes. We still have to actually play those games. And then we have an actual event that we're going to be hosting May 13th.
Okay.
At Noble Night Games. So I might as well plug that since we're plugging Warcry stuff too.
Are you building those lists and giving them to each other to play? Like you're building a list for each other or for yourself?
For ourselves. So we each we had a whole list of suggested themes for us to build with. And then for each of us, we drew out of a hat to see what we were going to have to build.
Okay.
So we ended up with random in the sense that the themes are kind of random. And then also we didn't know which of the suggested themes we were going to be building.
All right.
All right. And then as far as my hobby's dumb, it's just that I'm still working on Warcry terrain. I think I'm on the second box and the second tree. So second tree of second box, for those of you playing along at home and trying to keep track of how far along I am. First tree of second box. That's an involved assembly. It's like with the backing, and then there's the dangling like canopy thing.
Yeah.
Oof, there's a lot to that thing.
So that puts you on tree 6 overall, right?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I would be on tree 6. Yep. So the tree just before, I believe you affectionately refer to the bone hole.
Yeah.
I'm not
the knot tree.
Next. So yeah, it's tricky because do I love gluing things together. That's probably my favorite part of the hobby, really. And I know that I'd kick myself if I did like permanently glue a lot of these Warcry trees together. So I've been leaving them in sub-assemblies, but that drives me crazy, and I wish I could just put them together. But I won't do it. Future Aaron will love me for it. Actually, no, Future Aaron already hates me. So, okay, let's keep on going then, unless there's anything else you guys want to talk about before we get into the story phase.
Yeah, I'm done talking about fun stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, let's get
time to get down to business.
Let's do
story.
Homework. But joke's on you. I'm just kidding. There's one more thing we got to get through, and it's these Mortal plugs. And you're saying, Aaron, I'm already listening to Mortal Realms. Get off my case. And I say, too bad. Sit there and listen to you.
Not listening to enough of it.
It's true. I need more. Hey, you can find more episodes of this podcast and all of our other shows at themortalrealms.com. And you'd say, what other shows? I would say, if you wanted to hear more of Paul, you could get the Path to Story podcast. If you wanted to hear more of Eric, you could get the Dogs of Warcry podcast. If you wanted to get more of Phil, you could get the What the Hex podcast. And if you wanted to get more of me, you're already in the right place. It's very
Did you plan that? You pick one of us from each podcast?
I was thinking about it while I was doing the dishes tonight, actually. So I was trying to think of
more professional.
Yeah, sneak it in there. You can email us your feedback at mortalrealms@gmail.com. There is no the, it's just mortalrealms@gmail.com. You can find our Patreon at patreon.com/themortalrealms. Whoops, the is back to support the show and get early releases of the story phase and access to what is now exclusive content like the Pocket Realms, which is short story phases hosted by Davy and myself, Aaron. And then if you can't or don't want to pitch in monetarily, which is fine, we don't expect you to, then head on over to your podcast service of choice and give us a review. Or instead, just tell your friends, your family, your doctor, your dentist, who's also a doctor, I guess, all about the Mortal Realms. Because, word of mouth is really the best way to get this out there. Though also reviews probably help too, or the algorithm.
I'll just put it out there. We don't want your Patreon if you're going to make us feel guilty about it.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm fine. I don't feel guilty about most things. So try your best, I suppose. Lay it on me. That's not true. Honestly, out of the four of us, I probably feel the most guilt on anybody. So that is the end of the plugs right then and there. I think we could probably do the story phase, which is now Paul's turn. Hey, Paul, take us there.
The story phase. In the story phase, we delve into the stories, characters, creatures, and environments of the 9 realms.
We sure do. And like I said before, we're going to do a Seraphon Battletome episode. You may be thinking to yourself, Aaron, 3 years ago in this exact month of April 2020, you already did a Seraphon Battletome. We sure did, but we're going to do another one because there's a bigger release. And GW was kind enough to send us the Battletome, and they said, hey, do your thing. And we said, all right, don't mind if we do. So thank you, GW, for sending us the Seraphon Battletome so we can chat about it yet again, another time.
Did you guys know the Seraphon god of repeating? Deja vu-addle?
Oh, yeah? Mm.
Yeah.
Cool. I thought it was a shot at me for a second, but okay, cool. That's a good joke. That's fine. All right, neat. So we won't necessarily dive into the same exact stuff because that would be repetitive from the last episode. But I don't know.
Plus, we want you go back and listen to that one first, and then listen to this one to see which
we need
what
to
changed.
listen real bad. So, please do so. This is equal parts sequel and maybe reimagining of that previous episode. But one thing I can't get past, and I don't know if we even did it back then. So all the more reason to do it now. No, I think we might have. Actually, Klaus would be able to tell us if we did or didn't. Is my favorite segment. We will always do my favorite segment. I don't care how repetitive it is. It is our one-sentence summary of the faction or the race or whatever. Because I want to know what you guys think, summed up in one sentence, of the Seraphon. I always go to Paul first, and today will be no exception. Hey, Paul, give me your one-sentence summary of the Olfan.
Let's do reptilian raptors that are cold-blooded and cold-hearted killers who lay down their lives for the plan of the old ones.
It's true. Guys, remind me, before the end of the episode, while you guys are talking and I won't be paying attention, remind me to count how many times the phrase cold-blooded is used in this Battletome, because I noted it is used an awful lot. So good call putting it in your one-sentence summary, because it seems vital to this faction or race. Hey, I think Eric was last. So Phil, would you be so kind as to give us a one-sentence summary of the Seraphon to the best of your ability?
I would. Seraphon are a herpetological cornucopia of magic and might. You might call them dinosaur people.
You son of a gun. Those are some $10 words right there, and I love it.
They use a lot of those in this book, too.
Yeah. I feel like mine was a 5th grade introduction. Yours was like a PhD level introduction. I understand with myself now.
We have to vary the reading levels that we have for our audiences, because really we may have some 5th graders and we may have some PhDs. Honestly, we probably have neither of those things listening to this episode currently.
So what you're saying is I'm the big bird of the mortal realms. I'm the guy that says the stupid thing so listeners can understand what's going on. I buy that.
Yeah, man. If I thought that listeners understood what you said, I would say that it was true. But
and now all I can think of is Sigmar Sesame Street.
The when he throws his hammer and loses it, that'd be Grover going near and far.
The coalesced are near. The starboard are far.
If there were monsters at the end of this book, I feel like the ending would be a lot different than original.
I mean, technically, the Bastillodon is the last entry in the book, so there are monsters at the end of this book.
That's true in a technical sense. Hey, Eric, would you be so kind as to give us a one-sentence summary of the Seraphon?
Oh, we're still doing that? I thought maybe I'd gotten away from it by us just chatting around and going down to there.
You wish.
Okay.
I don't know if you heard, but this is my favorite segment.
All right. Scaly space lords that see stars until they hit the ground and get into terraforming and pterodons. That's all I got. I just needed a couple of alliterations in there.
And you don't need any more than that. In fact, any more than that would be unallowed. Only one sentence.
What do you call a coalesced Seraphon law form? A terra firma.
I might call a lawyer on that terraforming.
Davey will be so mad when he listens to this. All right.
It's just going to be nothing but puns.
Yeah.
Thick all the way through.
I should really keep Eric and Paul separate. Keep them separate.
People will be wondering if we're the same person because you never see us in the room at the same time.
That's true. All right. We got through my favorite segment of the whatever. So normally this is where I talk about the origins, but I don't exactly want to because we've already done that before, and I'm going to try to focus on some of the newer things. So I will frame the question in this way. I think we had some concept of origins originally. Did this book give us anything new on the origin front, or maybe even just early days of the Seraphon? Did we glean anything, gain anything? Has anything been changed from the previous Battletome about the origins of the Seraphon? And if the answer is no, this is going to be a very boring segment. But what do you guys think?
I believe so, but it's very slight.
Ooh, tell me more if you have more to tell.
Yeah, so previously we already knew that the Seraphon had somehow managed to use their temple ships to get to the mortal realms. And we know that they left the old world in the temple ships. But we get a little bit more info this time around saying that they've sort of had to shut down their ships, put everything into stasis, and like sort of drift through space. And that part, I think, was not as clear in the last Battletome. We know that as they were drifting through, or I guess not drifting, but in the last Battletome, we knew that they were just sort of aimlessly flying through space. This time around, it sounds like they literally couldn't do much because they just had run out of energy. And then Dracothian finds them, reinvigorates them, leads them to the mortal realms into Azir. And in Azir, they actually say this time around they were in, like, I guess, high orbit of Azir, if that's a thing, and siphoned off magical energy from Azir to restart their ships and wake up all the Seraphon that were in stasis. And that's a lot more like leaning almost into sci-fi like stuff that they didn't do in the previous tome. They also restarted their spawning pools, which I don't think we had a whole lot of talk about spawning pools in the previous tomes.
One thing I didn't realize is that, like, when they were going into stasis, the only reason they were able to stay alive while they were floating through the voids of space is because, like, the Slan themselves, which were like sort of low grade, like a small draw battery to some degree, and that's what kept them alive for all that time. But like you said, like, they couldn't do anything beyond just exist or keeping their cryogenically frozen. I don't know if it's really frozen stasis. So I feel like a couple times in this book, it talks about how, like, the Slan can do things to power their ship. Like, they themselves are like a source of power. Not the strongest, but some source of power. So that was interesting to me. I couldn't remember if that was always spelled out as clearly previously.
I don't think so. It is definitely like leaning more into, hey, look at how powerful Slan are, and like all the stuff that they're doing to get their race from the old world to the mortal realms.
Was the origin pieces about their fragmented memory of the past a thing?
Yes, only in the sense that, like, the Slan live for so long, and not all of the Slan are from like the original spawn. In fact, the only original spawning Slan left is Croak, who's technically dead. So they're all like trying to remember the great plan.
I am dead.
And many of them weren't even there, and the others, are having to try and piece things together from thousands and thousands of years. So it's sort of like they're not actually sure anymore.
Well, the piece that seemed new to me was that not only it's the age thing, but this great war between the old ones and chaos was so brutal.
Yeah, that is new.
That the old ones took those memories from the Slan, but in doing so also erased some of their understanding of the great plan. So that as an origin seemed a little fresh to me.
I wonder, was that ever in the and I don't know if anyone here knows, but was that ever in the old world? Like, was that old world lore too, or is it brand new, like universally? I don't know. So be curious to figure out.
I've got a divergence, which includes that. So my understanding of lore of Warhammer Fantasy Battles was that they had some ancestral memory of what the old ones were, but it wasn't very clear. It was relatively spotty, right? They didn't know what the great plan was. So what we're kind of dancing around here is that the entire basis of the Seraphon motivation is based on these people that were called the Old Ones, or maybe not people, creatures that were called the Old Ones, and they had made this great plan. And the entire creation of the Seraphon race, which were the lizardmen in the Warhammer Fantasy Battles, was based on the idea that the lizardmen would create and execute this great plan that they had. Now, when the old world blew up, basically they failed miserably, because the great plan was to stop chaos from taking everything over, right? So my understanding of how this lore has developed is that when we got the first Seraphon book, it was one of the first books that came out for Age of Sigmar, and the Seraphon were actually order demons. They actually had a demon keyword, if I remember correctly. And so they were basically these completely created beings that just appeared, right? They were the thoughts of the Slann that were able to become flesh because of the magic of the Slann. So the Slann were central towards the Seraphon in the first Battletome because they were the reason that the Seraphon existed. Like, the Seraphon literally couldn't exist without the Slann believing them into existence. When we got the second Battletome in 2020, we got this nuanced understanding of what they were, which is that we still had this idea that they would come down from the stars, but we got the distinction between the Starborn and the Coalesced. And the Coalesced are Seraphon that have been in the realms for long enough that they have some measure of stability from the realms. And now in this third edition Battletome, what we have is, I think we have ironically, a return to some of the Warhammer Fantasy Battle themes that we had before the old world blew up, but incorporating these two new themes that we've gotten from Age of Sigmar, and we've kind of married them all together into this new identity of, this is what Seraphon are, and this is how they approach the mortal realms. And so I'd agree completely with everything that Phil said, and I agree with the things that he was like, I don't think this was in the last Battletome, because I don't remember that either. And to me, what that actually gives is like a really interesting, nuanced evolution and a nuanced understanding of what it means to be Seraphon now. And so to throw that in, the one major difference we have from the last Battletome to this one, apart from the model refresh and the range refresh, is that we've had Lord Croak show up again. So he was a character from the old world, and he's now a character in Age of Sigmar. And he seems to be the narrative thrust that's really pushing this lore forward in this Battletome. So Phil, what do you think about that? Am I completely off base? Am I filling in some blanks? What are you thinking?
No, I mean, that was what I was getting to, is that they are sort of actually kind of going backwards to be able to go forwards. I think we even see it in a couple of different segments throughout the book, where some of the previous lore is used as like, almost like these are the myths and legends that the mortal races in the mortal realms tell about the Seraphon. And it's sort of like having to retcon some of this stuff to be like, we did that and we decided that didn't work. So now these are stories that people told about the Seraphon. That's not really how they worked, but it's how they seemed like they worked. Which is just, I think it's kind of funny that in a good way that they sort of owned that and were like, hey, let's keep it around, but let's sort of tongue in cheek make fun of ourselves with this.
Which leads to one of my favorite words, unreliable narrator.
Oh my God.
They've really
there it is
into this Battletome. I won't try and say it too many times, but like
35 minutes.
It took you a while to get there.
I was super patient, and like I didn't interrupt.
Absolutely.
I was being patient and waiting.
Yeah, perfect.
Right on. Very cool. I'm sorry. I've pulled up all the Seraphon books now. I'm trying to see, I'm trying to quick compare them to see what is or isn't in them.
No, I think it's interesting too to kind of retcon that previously, the destruction of the old world was the breaking of the plan. But I think what they've reestablished is that the plan is still in motion. That the dying of the old world was not the thing that needed to be prevented in the plan. That it's chaos taking over all of the realms and stuff that is sort of the thing that they are intended to avoid. But how to do that, even amidst the Slann, there isn't a clear, unified kind of idea of what that plan from the old ones is, because those memories are gone and that forward motion is a little chaotic for them.
Well, I mean, not with a capital C though.
Small C.
I like the way narratively that they incorporated that into the lore here, because the way that they incorporated that into the lore is specifically through the character of Lord Croak, because Lord Croak is the only first generation Slann. So they big back this idea that there's only 5 generations of Slann, which was something that was super big deal in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and you had different rules for every generation. But Lord Croak is the only Slann that is still in existence that was from the first generation. So he's the only Slann who knew the old ones, or could remember at any point. And because he's just showed up in the narrative now, they've kind of elided everything that happened before, as it was all the rest of the Slann who, there are less than 5 of the second generation, but then everything else is 3rd, 4th, or 5th. So farther and farther removed from the old ones. And they've all been working together as a committee to try and figure out what's moving forward and how to go through with the great plan. Whereas Croak literally just shows up and is like, we're doing this now. And they're like, this isn't in any of our scriptures. This is not in any of our plaques. Why are we doing this? Because I said so. Right? So they kind of get around the idea of the great plan by saying, well, these guys never knew what it was to begin with. And Lord Croak has been gone for so long, communing with who knows what, doing this techless thing where he abandoned his race in the hour of their greatest need. But now he's here and he's telling us what to do. So we're kind of good and we're going to move forward.
How dare you try and judge a celestial being that not what their mind or motive is?
Unfathomable. I can't even say the word. That's how above him, or above us he is I can't pronounce the adjective to describe him. So, all right, we're hanging out in the Age of Myth a little bit. So, yada, yada, yada. They find the mortal realms. They kick it in his ear for a hot second. Did you guys have any stories in this battle tome, this one that we're talking about, that were new or exciting or jumped out at you from the Age of Myth that you wanted to talk about from this time frame?
I think we've hit on the big things, sort of the very earliest parts, but there was a small mention in one segment of sort of the early peoples of the mortal realms, where as part of the Great Plan, the Seraphon would seed knowledge about magic or certain technologies into strategically placed groups of people to be hey, if you develop faster and better than the other groups around you, you can help, protect this area from chaos. Yeah. And I thought that was interesting that they added this concept of shifting and directing the mortal realms as something the Seraphon have been doing since the beginning. I'm pretty sure that never came up before.
No. And the thing I like is that they specifically mentioned the Aglaraxi, which is the first campaign setting that we have, but they're also massively figured into Soulbound, the role-playing game. I thought that was fun.
Nice. Good tie in there.
It kind of reminds me of how the elves taught the humans magic, in the old world, right? That's similar in concept of that. We've got this very ancient, powerful race that is teaching us a bunch of dummies how to live and succeed. One of the stories that jumped out at me in that it is worth telling in this story is that just the retelling of the Age of Myth side of the Kragnos story, basically, and how he was stomping around and chasing down Draconiths. I won't rehash the details because I feel like we've covered it a bunch of times, especially in the Broken Realm stuff. But the Seraphon were integral sort of in saving that race and hiding it away. And so if you're going to do a timeline story, especially with some of these new details that we've learned recently. And by recently, I mean in the past couple of years since the last Seraphon book. It's worth mentioning that, yes, they do call that stuff out because, it was important in the history of the Seraphon, amongst many other things.
Yeah. I was surprised. I don't think the Slann are as endangered as my concept originally was. They talk about in the Kragness story how they lost a number of Slann in that fight. And to me, my initial thought was like, is it worth losing Slann in these fights? Like, they're such a precious commodity. So to have it be that they were willing to sacrifice for that is interesting.
It's Warhammer though. Like, there's always of a dying race. There's always just enough to get whatever story you need to get across. Right? There's always just enough Slann to be like, all right, well, we lost so many, but there will always be so many left.
Yeah, but this is the first time I feel like in Warhammer Fantasy Battles that was a super strong theme. The Dark Elves were a dying race. The High Elves were a dying race. The Wood Elves were a dying race, right? But this is the first time that like we've specifically seen the mention of this race is a dying race. And we have it with Seraphon now, which I think is interesting because they can create, endlessly through their spawning pools. So I just thought that was interesting. And that's as opposed to 40K where it's more grimdark and AOS is more hopeful. This is the first time that we've had less hope, right?
I mean, I feel like they suffer from the photocopy of a photocopy problem.
Yeah.
No doubt. All right. Any Age of Myth final thoughts before we keep on trucking along to our Age of Chaos?
Did it even happen? That's what I'm going to say.
It's we may never know. All right, let's talk about some Age of Chaos stuff. Did we learn anything new, I guess maybe broadly, about the Age of Chaos that we didn't know before? And if the answer is no, then were there any stories that you guys wanted to talk about from this era?
So just a couple very small things, at least that I noticed. In one segment, there's just a very quick mention of subcults of mortals who are starting to worship Seraphon as embodiments of Dracothian, and that the Church of Unberogan, which I don't know if I've seen a reference to that recently, but they're like, hey, that's not cool. You guys have to cut that out.
Yeah, Will's going to be super excited because his entire Stormcast force is based on the idea that they worship Dracothian as opposed to Sigmar. So,
there you go. So there's even now official lore to support that. And then there was seemingly just a random story about the anyway, one of the subgroups of the Seraphon, Dracothian's Tale is the name that I was blanking on. They're fighting forces of Nurgle, and right at the end, they make mention of it like having stopped the destruction of a mortal town or city and saving a character named Garridan, which didn't ring any bells for me. Is that a character we're supposed to know?
Oh man, you're leading into what a fun segue. Good job, Phil. So before I answer your question, let me answer your question with another question from a listener. A listener goes by the name of Darth Alec from our Discord. Yes, we're starting. Get ready for the questions, listeners. I gotta do the whole spiel because everybody loves it. I don't know if they do. I'm joking. We have listener questions. The show's full of listener questions. It's the whole reason I get out of bed every morning, so we can answer these questions in the show. And if you yourself, listener, want to get questions on the show, it's really easy. It's real simple. Just remember these insert number here steps. First, step number 1, hang out in the Discord every single day, all day, and night actually too. It's not just a daytime thing. Sometimes I'm up late and I think, I got to ask some questions. So hang out in the Discord, and like a thief in the night, I will come unannounced asking if anybody has any questions that they want us to talk about on the episode. You never know what's going to come, which is why I have to stay there all day. You'll have, since you have nothing else to do while you sit in the Discord all day, because there's nothing else going on other than this, as far as I'm concerned, you have listed out all sorts of questions you've just been dying to ask us, and you rattle them off into the Discord, and I collect them, harvest them like wheat, and then I make my bread, which is this episode, and we ask those questions here. I'm running out of ways to describe it, frankly. It's the joke's kind of run its course. But Darth Alec asks, does Gardas get a mention? Presumably in this Battletome. And Phil, if you forgot what your question was, you're saying, who's this Garridan fella in the city of Demesnes? It begins with a D and there's a bunch of S's in it.
Yeah.
It was that mortal. That is Gardas Steelsoul in his mortal form. And had the Seraphon not rolled up, saved this dude's life, who's to say whether or not he ever would have been reforged one day? And if Gardas hadn't walked these mortal realms, I think the world would have been a worse off place for it. And so it goes to show that Gardas, I think, presumably had some strong element in the great plan, or at least someone thought that he did. And it was worth saving.
There's an earlier section, kind of in introducing the Seraphon, talks about this thing called the Astromatrix, which is sort of the weaving of all magics and ley lines and things throughout the mortal realms, and that it's one of those things that the Seraphon perceive and can manipulate where other beings can't. But one of the things it says is that there are kind of echoes of names that bounce around or repeat or come up again and again. And there were 4 names that they had in this little list. Vendenst was a name that bounced around in the Fates. Lyrior, and then Broad, which is King of the Gargants, right? And then lastly, Gardas was one of those names that comes up in the Fates. So it's definitely a second reference to being part of, the great plan or having some piece in it, seems like.
It seems odd to me to compare some of these names. Like Gardas is like a big name, but like, I don't know, the Vendents, like they're going to die soon. Like that's how important they're going to end up being.
Maybe they'll be reforged.
Well, maybe. Yeah. Lyrior is the Lord Regent of the Venari of the Lumineth. So he's that dude he's like that named character who's on that mountain.
Got it.
So that's why he's a big deal. Cool. So, checked off one question, guys. Spoiler alert for the rest of this episode. Darth Alec has a lot of them. Thank you. Darth
you've told him to shape his life around sitting in the Discord, asking questions, and he has.
He's not obedient.
He literally has to listen in the middle of the night because he's from Europe. So, he's doing exactly what you asked.
Thank you so very kindly. And so does everyone else who's about to ask questions in this episode. Do you guys have other stories from this era, from the Age of Chaos, that you guys want to chat about that jumped out at you?
So I like the Endless Enmity story. So it talks about a Star Master, Pochi Moke, and he's mortally wounded.
Pochi.
Right? Like, how cute is that? Come on.
When Pochi Moke is not on...
like a Studio Ghibli name.
Everybody's supposed to be asking, where's Pochi Moke?
Where's Pochi Moke?
So he realizes that he's not going to live forever, right? Which to Aslan is a pretty significant realization, right?
In year 10,024 of his life.
In the year 10,000. So he also talks about how chaos can't be surrendered to. So he actually gathers Slan who have suffered similar grave wounds, and he leads his, quote, extinctionists to establish temple cities within regions believed almost fully lost to chaos. And so basically, these are Slan who have intentionally decided to sacrifice their lives for, not to go 240K, the greater good. And then in preparing for that have become these mummified priests, just like Croak is. So I thought that was a cool little lore thing to, number one, justify the Lich priest aspect of the Slan, but also to just make this like sliver faction. Like I think it's super interesting when you introduce these little tiny details, like we had the completely racist characters in Excelsis who wanted to kill all the elves, right? Like that to me is interesting and adds so much flavor to the lore and to the world. So I thought this was super cool because it added that little bit of flavor and that little bit of interest.
Comma froggies.
Yeah. Two thoughts on your note. One, I think the most interesting part of that story was the fact that the reason that they even went to go like sacrifice themselves in the first place is because they know that when they die, the Slan, their followers are going to go feral, right? And they're worried that like, if I die somewhere where they'll cause collateral damage, that's not going to, contribute to the great plan at all. So they not only do they bring, it's a group of Slan, but it's their followers as well, knowing that when they drop their army or whatever is going to go hog wild on whatever is still around. And so like at least they know that like if they lose control, they're losing control in a place where it'll do some benefit. It'll do damage to the great enemy, which I thought was pretty neat. And then I was going to bring this up later, but since you talk about it here, I think this Seraphon book, I think, does a pretty good job in these little timeline stories of both hitting the high marks of the big, things that need to be talked about in a timeline, but they sprinkle quite a bit of the weird and the odd stories in here, which I feel like sometimes it's hit or miss in some of these newer Battletomes, in that they don't get weird enough. And I think the Seraphon does some cool weird stuff. So it's to that credit. And to that end, my favorite story, at least in the Age of Chaos, is that the Deepkin are swimming around. It's maybe in Hish or some other, I think it is Hish. And they're trying to set up a new enclave somewhere. And they come and they are swimming around. They find this chasm that they want to set up shop in. And they see that there's this ornate, architecture baked into the wall, some seawall or something like that. And they're like, oh, that's weird. And they go to investigate. But then these half reptilian, half amphibian creatures come swimming out and drive them off, or eliminate or wipe them out, or what have you. It's underwater Seraphon. And if I'm talking about how I like these weird little stories, here's an example of, hey, what does Seraphon look like when they've been kicking it underwater for so long, right? The book talks about how Seraphon can somehow adapt to their environment, or specifically kind of like how do they adapt to the realms, but that doesn't mean they can't adapt in other ways. And these underwater Seraphon seem very cool. So like, what a neat idea. What a weird idea. And let's get more of that stuff. So very cool.
Do you want to do a deep dive on that?
Let's stay in the shallows and move on.
Well, so the deep dive is, the reason I like this story is because this is a callback to Warhammer Fantasy Battles. This actual god was named in Lustria, and he was the god of a temple city that had been flooded. And his lizardmen were half underwater, half reptiles, so half amphibian, half reptiles. So this is a direct callback to a city that existed in the old world. And so I love that, because that's a tiny piece of lore to bring forward that I think is super cool. And now we have so many more kits. I think you could actually do some sweet kit bashing if you really put your mind to it. So
there's a lot of like fins for the Deepkin that you could just swap. You could steal those fins.
Yeah. Who doesn't want skinks on turtles? I mean,
the Seekers are very seahorsey. The Selenishi ones, so there's a lot of bits off of there that could work.
True.
Yeah.
Well, just think Bastillodon and whatever the turtle is for the Deepkin, right? Like similar concept, a shelled thing that like you could do something with that for sure. But I swear to God, don't you do it. Don't you dare.
Yeah, look at you coming up with some army conversions.
Episode over. I'm done with this. Click. Other Age of Chaos stories or thoughts that you guys want to chat about?
Well, I just thought it was a good point here to mention that they elaborate a little bit more about the Coalesced. So the Seraphon who have sort of lived for a long enough period of time in the actual realms, not on the ships, and that they clarified that they take on attributes of the magic of those realms. The Starborn are infused with Azurite magic, which is why they have the sort of celestial appearance. But they made a point of saying that the Seraphon who live in the realms take on sort of the identity of the realms. So if they live in Gur, for instance, they're going to be much more bestial. And I think it was hinted at previously that they sort of become adapted to the realm, but they didn't quite make that connection of like they're being infused with the magic of that realm.
Yeah. And this is jumping ahead a little bit. I won't dive too much into the topic, but like some of the new stuff that's come out, like, although very clearly, like distinctly a Seraphon thing, they have a little bit of characteristics of different realms baked into their lore, at least, if not the models themselves. And we'll talk about those later, but Axian or Olguian.
Yep.
Got it in one. We'll talk about that later. All right, cool. So then I might, unless any other Age of Chaos thoughts, or I'm going to go to Age of Sigmar. Get ready. Here it comes. Let's do it. All right. So Age of Sigmar, lightning bolts, you guys. Did you learn anything about these early days? Anyways, let's keep it early. Early days, Age of Sigmar, or were there any really stories? But I know there's not too many stories, but I'll ask anyways, from this time frame that you guys wanted to chat about.
I felt like a lot of the stuff here was stuff that we had before, maybe told in slightly different ways, but it's a lot of the same stories. Seraphon working alongside Stormcast, Seraphon setting up shop in some of the cities of Sigmar. But I don't remember there being anything particularly new or interesting.
Sure. I mean, to that end, Darth Alec had asked, is the Seraphon / Stormcast relation expanded on? Now seems as good a time as any to ask that question. Did you guys feel, whether here or elsewhere in the book, that relationship was for lack of, I'm just going to say it again, expanded on in any way?
It very clearly said that for human allies, they would be just as willing to snuff them out if they were going against the plan. Though it seemed like the Stormcast, because they live longer and have considerably more power, they considered them, I wouldn't say equals, but certainly of more value or benefit.
True. Which I think is always, and not to say you weren't saying this, but I feel like that's always been the case. I don't know that anything has been expanded beyond that much. Any other thoughts?
I think what we do see, and it's sprinkled throughout as more just flavor rather than like, here's exactly how this relationship works, is just seeing like little tableaus of, larger stories where it's like, and here's an example of Seraphon doing something with Stormcast. There's one that I don't remember if it was just one of those little side blurbs that shows up, but it was specifically an Astral Templar and a Saurus Warrior fighting together, and like written in a short story format where it was like there's sort of a break in the fighting, and Stormcast tries to talk to the Saurus, and he's just like, yeah, whatever, completely ignoring them. And then I think it was a she. Anyway, Stormcast is like,
Praha Thundermane was her name.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, I killed this many. I think they're fighting orcs. And then that seems to get the attention of the Saurus Warrior, and then he like slaps his tail on the ground to count how many he killed. And it was like, that's the thing that they could connect about. And I thought that was pretty funny little way of like tying the Astral Templars specifically together with the Saurus, because Astral Templars are all about being the beast killers and fighters and sort of have that warrior mentality, which the Saurus are kind of in that same vein.
Classic Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's definitely that exact reference, but
I actually did a quick Google search on the name because it rang a bell. And so like Thundermane, I got one little thing where somebody else had painted up a Night Quester from like GW Manchester forever ago, which I thought was kind of cool that they had like somehow incorporated that. But then also in the Magic game they released for Age of Sigmar, a Thundermane is actually an Azerite lion. So I thought that was super cool to have that direct connection. So it's that's all. It was a little cool thing.
Nice.
Well, neat. Any other early Age of Sigmar thoughts that jump out at you, or is this does this remain fairly unchanged to what we know already?
It's the most similar.
Yep. That's true. Well, although that's true, what will give it a run for its money is the Time of Tribulation Soul Wars area, which is to say remaining very similar, because I don't know that we have much more here either. No. That seems to be the trend with these books, which makes sense, right? It's an era that we dove pretty deeply in the second edition Battletomes, and so why rehash what has been so very clearly covered previously? So there's one little story just to make sure that you didn't forget that it happened in this timeline, but I don't know that there was too much more to add unless you guys can think of anything that I'm missing.
No, there's
Let's
not much to say.
Gloss right over to the new stuff, the sweet new third edition eras, that Broken Realms Age of Beasts. So there hasn't been a Seraphon book since this stuff dropped, so it covers a fair bit of ground, right? There's a bit of story has happened since then. I will ask, back to the way I normally ask these questions, is first, before we get into stories broadly, what does the the Broken Realms Age of Beasts time frame, what does that mean for the Seraphon? I feel like there's some high points, some interesting things that the Seraphon are interacting with. What do you guys think are the most interesting stuffs that is happening in this time frame for the lizardmen? Hit me.
So I feel like they're being fairly reactive at this point, or at least the majority of the Seraphon. They seem like they were caught off guard with Kragnos coming back, and previously they were like, we're just going to do our thing, we're going to keep working towards the great plan, and then they're like, oh man, this is going to mess up all of our plans if we don't do something. So they have to like completely shift gears, focus on Gur. It's mentioned in a lot of these little stories that the magic of Gur is having a significant effect on a lot of the Seraphon, and so they're having to work around some of that, but also harnessing it. So lots of trying to sort of get back on track and readjust to the new world order, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned I think the first thing that jumps out at me is just the reaction to the Kragnos side of things, right? And so again, I won't rehash all the story beats because we did a whole episode on this stuff. But yes, since they were so integral, Lord Croak maybe specifically, and others, slain Slan, that's fun, slain Slan. They were there in the beginning, so that they also are, reactive to the ramifications of him showing up. And so it's not even just like a physicality thing, like him just smashing stuff, but also what him showing up has done to the Astromatrix sort of broadly, regardless of where he is specifically. Just his presence in the realms is throwing things for a loop, and so that they have to figure out how to protect and preserve and things of that nature. There's to the feral aspect of it, right? So like Gur's in Ascendance, the magic of beasts. Well, these guys are literally walking animal people, right? Like they don't think of themselves that way. Maybe most people don't think of themselves that way, but at the end of the day, they're lizard dudes. And so much of their coalesced identity is like that ferocity and feralness and other F words. And so if it's turning people into like killing machines, it's absolutely killing lizard people or turning lizard people into like killing machines as well. And so it spends a fair bit of time talking about like how, and there's some stories here, maybe we can get into specifics, but like how they're losing themselves a little bit and they're losing a little bit of control, which is noteworthy. I'm going to stop there. What other things jumped out at you guys in terms of just broad strokes about this age?
There's a question from Chrisling.
Ooh, yeah, they do.
Asking any reference to the Eye of Chotek. I will say they have, in part of the book, they have a specific call out, kind of reiterating what we've heard in a war cry. The Eye of Chotek is a temple ship. It crashed in Gur. Here it says that it isn't the only temple ship, wasn't the first temple ship to crash into Gur, but the most famous. And it confirms, not an unreliable narrator, but confirms that it was crashed struck from the heaven by Tzeentch demons, which was a speculatory kind of sprinkle in some of the war cry stuff. So definitely Tzeentch demons to blame. And then again, kind of talks about Honorio Talax, who, comes in and, hey, look what I found. I've discovered a ship and named it after me. So very colonial of him. And then also just kind of piggybacking on that, the Hunters of Huanshi are mentioned in their own kind of entry in the kind of fighter category and stuff, which is, and what I'll mention there is that, and I'm going to coin this term, you are struggling with, having characteristics of Ulgu. We're going to call that being Ulgui, and that they have that ability to like fade into the shadows and that sort of stuff. So they're all Ulgui, I think that then it also talks about it goes more specific then into the Ravening Ruin, which is a Tzeentchian demon attacks the Eye of Chotek and steals what's called the Codex Astromantica, an arcane device detailing key nodes of the Astromatrix. So some of their tools for navigating or reading or manipulating the astromatrix are now in the hands of Tzeentch. So now, and we all know, so in Warcry, the Eye of Chotek, this ship, is sort of taking the trope of, Indiana Jones Temple of Doom. People are going in to find their treasures and all this kind of lost stuff. I like this. There's a kind of a pattern here where that's the current day Seraphon's treasures in there. The Seraphon are actually after the treasures and hidden artifacts of the old ones that are scattered around the realms and in the void and stuff. So I think there's an interesting just kind of layer of who sees, one man's garbage is another man's treasure, right? So what the Slann might see is their leavings, their droppings. The Ven Talax is like, hey, that's gold to me.
Yeah.
So.
Or literal gold. The book spends some time talking about how the Seraphon will offer up gold because it's nothing to them. It's just shiny rock, and it'll divert or distract people from like the true prize, which is often the old one's stuff, whatever it is, which is fun too. Also, just because I want to circle back, Tyrael also wanted to know more about the Warcry ship. They asked what happened to the Warcry ship. And so I want to give them credit. Hey, Tyrell, we didn't forget your question. I saw it. Don't worry.
No, I skipped right over it. Chrisling was listed first, so you don't get.
Oh, man.
I guess I could blame it as alphabetical order, I guess.
I mean, do you want people to really be on the edge of their seats ready to reply? Then they got to get there first.
And have their
honestly, they might have been. I don't know what order it came in. It's probably I know. So there's that. So talking about, I feel like that's also the Warcry element is a newer thing for the Seraphon as well. Due diligence by putting in this book as well. Other big tent poles for the Seraphon in the Age of Beasts that you guys want to talk about. Keep them coming.
So I had a quick two things. Number one is they talk about the cursed skies, but they talk specifically about how the Seraphon are actually landing on the underside of the realms.
Yeah.
So I thought that was super cool. That's a thought that has always appealed to me because they show the maps as a plane, right? So what happens on the underside? Turns out that Seraphon actually land on the underside. And
do you think gravity works the same way? Like in that, like you would then get stuck to the ceiling of the bottom of the realms, and if that's the case, is there a whole other realm on the other side of it, like a whole other side of it?
Right. That's literally my thought goes. Is like, what's going on with this? Like, how does this work? Where do we figure this out? So
because we know you can fall through. It's either Hish or Olgo because they touch each other, right? Like they're like butt to butt, and so like you can go like from one to the other.
Yep. It's called the butt.
The other one is just literally just one word is different, but it's super interesting to me because they talk about Be'lakor, but instead of calling him a demon prince, they call him a demon lord. And I'm like, oh, is this a typo, or has he actually like ascended to a certain extent and has gained more power? So,
would you rather be a prince or a lord, though?
I mean, you
or Grand Marshal.
Lord, come on,
Lord. Very neat. Keep them coming, or I'm going to throw more tent poles at you, and you guys got to react to them.
I'll dodge it. I'll dodge it like a pro.
All right. Another big thing is the fact that the Draken. I know we mentioned the Kragnos side of things, but on the good guys side of things, that the Drakenith are back in action. The Seraphon decided, now's the time. We got to let you loose, let you out of our, hidden sub-realms and things like that. So Seraphon was sort of integral into the reintroduction of the Drakenith to the realm. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, I think Phil's got a couple of notes on this whole thing. It's in a different part of the book, but I think this is appropriate to talk about now.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to say it here. So they make mention so obviously this is something that's actually just an old idea that was mentioned previously that, hey, by the way, Drakenith eggs that were left after the Kragnos stuff, they were just on the ships from the Seraphon and they were just holding on to them until the time was right. Well, now the time is right. They're letting them back out into the world. Drakenith have been sort of revived. They mention that the Slann throughout the time of having the Drakenith eggs there were like using magic to implant visions of the prince of the Draconeth fighting chaos to like let them know that like, hey, these are the guys that you don't like. Get ready to go fight chaos because that's what we want you to do. That's what you should be doing. I guess we should also make mention, patron Mealhern, I hope I didn't completely butcher that, had a question that was specifically asking about if we learn more about the collaboration between the Draconeth and the Seraphon in this book. And obviously the answer is yes, because we've been talking about it for the last couple of minutes. But so that's a very specific example. And then I don't actually remember where it was exactly, but it is mentioned that in Lord Croak's temple ship specifically, there is a pocket realm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
TM.
Yeah, TM. Inside the ship that is made to resemble the lands where the Draconeth...
Thondia in particular.
Yeah. It is the home world of, or homelands, I guess, of the Draconeth, and that they're housing all the remaining Draconeth eggs there. And it's actually using a significant portion of Lord Croak's ship's power to do that. And the plan, as they say in this book, is that they are now getting ready to unleash all the rest of them back into the realm of Gur to sort of restart their home. And then they can shut off this pocket realm and have all the power of the ship back, which is kind of crazy that this whole time Lord Croak's ship has been doing all this crazy stuff and hasn't even been running at full strength. So that should be interesting.
It's super interesting because Lord Croak's ship is the one that shoots down the Silver Tower, right?
Yep.
So like it's the biggest, it's the most powerful, but it also specifically mentions that usually it's up in the upper atmosphere at Wazir, but because it's using so much power, it's not actually able to levitate as high above the realm. So it's actually come down quite a bit. But the other thing is, the thing that it triggered to me is this sounds like that dueling ring that the Stormcast have to train Stormcast how to fight that was made by Malarian. But this is a realm that's training the Seraphon, the
Draconeth.
The Draconeth, how to fight and what to believe, but it's being created by the Seraphon. So what is the connection between those two? And if they can create anything, why did they create the Thondia of now? Why didn't they create the Thondia of before? Right? Like, there's all kinds of questions and all kinds of answers that I want to know based on this little story. And then the last quick little thing, and this is going forward slightly, but I talked with Aaron about this earlier today, which is that this is the first time that we have a unit entry for a unit that does not exist on the table. Because when you're going through, you have the lore, and then you have the timeline, and then you have like how the army is organized, and then you have the unit entries. And Croak's ship is actually a unit entry in and of itself. In Lord Croak, Slan Starmaster, moving forward, Agradons, etc., his ship is its own entry. And that's where we get this little detail of, oh, by the way, these are where all the Draconeth are. So I thought that was super interesting and a diversion from previous Battletomes, and definitely something new in this Battletome.
Well,
I'm going to clarify for the folks who don't have this book. It's not, I wouldn't call it a unit entry. It's just a slice of information in between a bunch of unit entries. I think they didn't have a better place to put it in that. Like when you're talking about,
it's not a KO ship.
So yeah, exactly. It's not like it's to the same degree. It's not like a vehicle that you would think. So it is unique in that like that rarely happens in this stretch where they almost exclusively are just talking about the units in the game. So it is noteworthy in that regard. But I wouldn't call it. I wouldn't want to confuse people for them to think that it was a unit entry because it isn't.
What I like about this particular entry is it both mirrors the demigryphs that were always in the forest kind of reveal, right? Hey, where do these Draconeths come from? Oh, they were in the temple ship. And it doubles as I've been wearing weighted gloves and had one arm tied behind my back the whole time.
They're not left-handed.
couple of tropes in one there, which is pretty fun.
I know we just heard Aaron walk that back, but I'm not walking that back. We're going to see his temple ship as a model on the table. I'm calling it.
Son of a god.
I mean, 100% full well that will not happen. Listeners, please focus up on me right now. That isn't going to happen.
You need that. You remember that disclaimer we talked about, Paul? These views are my own. They're not representative of those of the mortal realms. No,
fair, true.
Another tent pole, which is surprising. I'm surprised they spent this much time on it, but sort of on the back half, we're jumping on, or I'm jumping around a little out of order here, but like their reaction to the incarnates is noteworthy. And so this is actually a specific story, but it is also a broad stroke thing that's happening in the Age of Beasts. In that, at first, a lot of the Slann are thinking, "Oh, wait, these incarnates coming out of nowhere. They must be disruptions to the Great Plan." And in fact, they get real mad at Ilariel for causing this stuff, like this disruption. They used to be pals, and now they're kind of not pals because they think.
But then they're pals again.
And then they're pals again. But they think she's caused this disruption to the Great Plan. Incarnates being sort of a byproduct of that, and they're talking about how they want to eliminate them. So a bunch of Slann are like, "All right, we're going to nuke these things out of the atmosphere." They're about to do so. But then all of a sudden, Lord Croak rolls up and he says, I don't think so. Let me show you. And he then summons a bunch of them and directs them at the bad guys, some chaos or something like that. And he shows how he can use them to their benefit and says, hey, other Slann, check this out. They aren't a disruption, but rather something, a tool that can be used to further the Great Plan. And don't jump to conclusions. And so this is an example. I think we were talking about it earlier about how Lord Croak has his own ways of thinking, whether or not, like, I doubt the old ones told him, hey, no millennia from now, keep an eye out for these incarnates. You're going to love them. But generally he's able to interpret and, sort of think on the fly and get creative with, resources that they present themselves is at least how I look at it.
When you're no longer alive, you're not tied to the things that tied you down in life. You can just break those barriers. Also, that that wave of life energy revitalized a ton of ships and recharged a bunch of those batteries. So we're like, all right, we ain't mad at you.
Yeah, but then some of those ships who had been knocked out, or they got just supercharged to charge, and they start causing too much trouble. And they're like, we gotta launch these things again because we got to get them out of here. And so they start shooting them off into the sky because they're causing destruction, because they were grounded. And they're like, no, these terraforming engines are going wild.
It sounds like they need to do some sort of Iron Man, Captain America move, where Iron Man shoots his laser and off of Captain's shield and it hits somebody really powerfully. They just need to supercharge. Ilariel needs to supercharge some lizards and shove them into chaos.
Point them in the right direction. Point and shoot. All right, so. I'm sure some of the things we've talked about also correlate to stories in this age, but I'll ask, are there other stories or specific stories related to the things that we've talked about that you guys want to chat about? This is a huge section compared to some of the other books that we've seen. There's a lot of Age of Beasts stuff, so there's got to be something good in here.
Lots of new stuff. There's a very odd story. It almost feels out of place, but there is specifically called The Highest Heavens, where a Slann in his temple ship, he's receiving these visions that convince him that the end of the old world was not, in fact, somehow a destruction of chaos, but in fact was Sotek swallowing the old world and forcing a new age and new philosophy onto the Seraphon, and
hashtag Paul theories. Go ahead.
and was leading them towards trying to adopt this ability to become pure energy or something like that. It was very strange. It was what is this? And then all of a sudden they say, and then he just disappeared and nobody's seen him again or his temple ship, and they're just gone. So I feel like they're seeding something with this, but they're
gonna bring back dream dinos later when it's more palatable.
But this is what I mean. It just feels very strange, but it is interesting that they do make reference to Sotek, and I guess this is something that we haven't talked about much yet. But the different old ones, and then I guess Sotek's not an old one, but
the new old
different
one.
Seraphon gods have a much more prevalent place in this book and get talked about a lot more, which is both cool and a pretty significant departure. So something to watch there. Something that's not quite so out in left field, though, they talk a lot in this segment about sort of the beastification, if you will, of the Seraphon, and specifically the Saurus and the different dinosaurs. So there's multiple different mentions of, like, you know, being particularly aggressive and, you know, having, well, let's see, there's specifically an entry that talks about some skink priests that were being guarded by Saurus Guard, and like the magic of Gur just overcame all these Saurus Guard, and they ended up actually like ripping apart these skinks, and the Slan had to basically cull these out of control Saurus. And so that was kind of another wake up call for the Slan to be like, we got to do something about this. This Gur place is out of control.
What other stories do you want to talk about?
To go back to Darth Alex's question, there's a small story that has reference to more Stormcast and interacting with this Seraphon. Is a story in reference to the Necroquake and a Slan who is basically sick from the, I don't remember what they called it, but it was basically the like death energies from the Necroquake, and they ended up teleporting this Stormcast. Oh man, I should have taken notes as to what type of Stormcast he was. But anyway, one of the priest ones.
Yeah, I forget.
And the skinks had to like basically try to communicate with him to be like, hey, could you try and help heal our bud here? And then like also placate these Saurus that are like trying to guard him while he's dying from this curse. So I guess the whole point of this story is to sort of show that like, hey, they're not above asking for help, and specifically they will, I guess, actually abduct Stormcast to help them.
Yeah, right. It was like an alien abduction, like sucked him up in a beam of light. You expect Stormcast to get lightning bolted to like his ear, but no. This one got sucked up to a ship instead. He was a Lord Relictor, by the way, who I think like have healing rain or something like that. I can't remember. It's been a while. Healing storms.
Yeah,
very cool. The story that we were talking about before, where like the Seraphon had to go under the realms because of the cursed sky. It's noteworthy that the fact they even cared is because the Slan, whilst under the effect of like the cursed skies, had a hard time like summoning or like interacting with like the celestial, I don't know, star-based powers that they have. Which I think is one of the first times that we've seen another race that weren't Stormcast get messed up by the cursed skies, or like have like an acute case of this sucks-itis. And so whether or not cursed skies are, you know, uniquely messing with like Azerian based folks, or it's just messes with anybody who's good, I guess, I don't know. But I can't remember other races having to react or do something about it, where in this case the Seraphon literally flipping to the other side of the world, which everything's bizarro and backwards. And I want to see stories from the under realms, not underworlds. That's a different thing.
No, very different entirely.
Yeah.
The story, A Celestial Shield, brings back or reemphasizes that the Vendenst are in fact bouncing around the astromatrix, their name, their purpose, and it talks about them. Let's see, it is Galen and Doralia Vendenst. That's father-daughter, I believe, right?
Yep.
And they're investigating a murder scene. They get kind of pounced on by vampires when out of the blue, then flashing light and darts and spears and whatnot come down, and they say they're the tips of the spears smeared with the venom of star cephalopods. So, you know, like octopus and squid ink type venom. I guess I don't know any cephalopods that have venom, but you know, here it is.
Well, you don't know any of the space ones, yeah.
But at the end, they clear out, and as they're leaving, the star priest Hakto informs Doralia that the serpent god watches her with interest, but doesn't say that to her dad. And he's a little miffed about that. So specifically, Doralia Vendenst has a star-fated person.
Listeners, you guys tell me. I don't know if this is a scene from the most recent Vendenst novel. Oh, it's not.
It is not. They didn't have
from any of the
Seraphon
stories
show up that I've seen yet. No, they definitely go out of the city. They definitely fight a vampire. I don't think it's of this specific branch, but I don't recall any Seraphon showing up in this novel.
That's
The
crazy.
Atropi Dynasty vampires.
Yeah, and I don't know what the Atropi Dynasty is either.
I think it's a new.
Yeah, maybe it is a future story. That would be interesting.
Could be.
It could be.
It's certainly a call back to some of the stuff from Broken Realms, where there was some skink priest who is talking to the Vendensts and basically using them as a communication method with folks inside Excelsis.
Correct.
So I guess trying to keep that thread connected, I suppose.
Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting. I've always liked Sotek, so especially in the old world, and so now he's making it in the new world, which is super cool. But yeah, I don't know that this specifically has a mention in any of the lore, so I'd be very intrigued to see how it kind of goes moving forward.
All right. Any other AGB 3.0 type stories or thoughts or contributions?
So, patron of the show, Neil Hearn, asked the question: do the Seraphon protect the Dawnbringer Crusades, or do they destroy those who don't follow the plan?
Good question.
Yes and no and yes. Yeah. Do they destroy people who don't follow the plan? Absolutely. There's one thing where like Lord Grog shows up and he's like, that settlement's not supposed to be there. And so they go and destroy it. And they're like, we didn't know if we were actually supposed to destroy it or if it was like supposed to be a quarter mile down river. But it wasn't supposed to be there. So we destroyed it. Right. But at the same time, there is a short story we were just talking about, the Thundermaid, where they're literally defending a Dawnbringer settlement from orcs because this Dawnbringer settlement is supposed to be there. So, yes, both and.
A big part of the current plan is to capture and take control of leyline nexuses. They want to control the best ones themselves, but for minor ones, they will lean on the Dawnbringer Crusaders to capture other ones and be able to use that kind of collective force to their own end. So,
and sometimes they'll make their presence known. They'll let them know that, like, hey, you've got Seraphon allies, but sometimes they'll be real secretive about it. They'll leave a trail of, like, dead or something like that to, like, lead the Dawnbringers in the right direction.
What fortune!
More dead things. And the Dawnbringer Crusades will be none the wiser.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that story that was in a previous Age of Sigmar story where the Stormcast are sitting there defending a realm gate, and they're like, oh, the Seraphon are showing up. And then they literally run past them, go through the realm gate, and disappear. I got many flashbacks of that story.
See you guys.
Yeah.
They also do make mention that for Dawnbringer settlements that are already located in particularly important places that need to be defended sort of at all costs, they will station Saurus there permanently, or at least long enough that they become somewhat of a permanent fixture in that town. And they basically just stand like statues on guard all the time, and people just kind of have to deal with that. But they are there to help protect the city. So, and I guess people are willing to be cool with that because, like, hey, they're going to help keep us safe, I guess.
Who doesn't love super sweet art that eventually shows up and kills you all? I mean, who doesn't love that?
What choice do they have?
Yeah.
All right, let's hop out of this timeline stuff. Let's talk about the race for not time specific. I don't know. That's a weird way. That's a weird segment. So let's talk about just the faction, how they live and how they work. Darth Alec wanted to know if we get the satisfaction, or no, do we get satisfaction for what the Starborn actually are now? He's asking, hey, it's been we sort of talked about it at the top of the episode of like it's been up for debate. It's been unclear what Starborn are. A lot of people have had a lot of different opinions about what Starborn Seraphon are. Has anything changed in this book, or has it been settled in previous books as to what these Starborn are? Do you guys have any thoughts?
So we definitely talked about this at the beginning of the episode. It is now confirmed that the Starborn are just the Seraphon who are still living on the ships, empowered by the energy of Azir. They don't have any particular temple cities on any particular realm. They're just flying around still. Those are the Starborn. But they are still spawned Seraphon. They still live inside the ships as real beings. They're not just dreams or like conjured energy. And they live inside the ships in like a facsimile of the old world jungles inside the temple ships. I don't know that
like a terrarium.
Yeah, I don't know if it's clarified specifically if like those jungles are also like pocket realms inside the ships, or if the ships are just big enough to have a whole jungle ecosystem inside them.
My guess would be the latter, because they really made it a point to talk about how hard it was to do the former. So it seems as if the latter is probably more likely.
That was my guess too, is that they're just gigantic and they're just like, here's the jungle where they live inside the ship. So yeah, I mean that is now very concrete that the Starborn are just itinerant Seraphon, whereas the Coalesced are the ones who are actually tied down to specific temples.
Real terrestrial.
They show a map of the realms, and they have icons that show the different temple ships. They don't name them necessarily, all of them, but there's around 24 of them around the different realms.
Yeah,
with the highest concentration around Azir. But
well, that was a super interesting thing for me, having read all the other battle tomes to this point for 3.0, is that every other battle tome has had one realm. Then they show you a part of that realm and say, this is where the race is based. And in this one, they show you a map of all 9 realms.
Yeah.
And then they say, this is where they are based within the 9 realms. So I thought that was cool. I thought that was a really small signal that really represented what the race actually means and how they're this spacefaring race as opposed to a ground-based race, which isn't everything else. So
they etheric avoided that pattern.
Yep.
There you go.
Sure
They avoided that pattern. I love every time I always make it a point to like note for each battle tome where the map is, because I feel like that it tells you a lot about the army when they show you when they pick which map they choose. And to your point, I was like, what a surprise to see that this is not yet a specific realm, but all the realms. Good choice for this Seraphon. That makes the most sense.
But also at the same time, I was a little disappointed because I was like, maybe we're going to get a map of Azir. No.
It's never once been a new map, I don't think.
Or a map of a temple ship.
It's a bit of a juxtaposition from the last tome, though, where they really focused on Gur and pointing out where Coatl's Claw, which is the like crashed group of Seraphon coalesced are, that are headed by a Saurus Oldblood because their Slann is dying. And they like really focused in on them in the last book. And in this book, it's like, hey, let's zoom out again and focus on everybody.
Zoom. Sorry, I don't know. I said that out loud. And this is a podcast. You can't just say nonsense like that.
We do it all the time. What are you talking about?
Last hour?
Normally, I save questions like this for later in the episode. But I'm bringing it up now because we're talking about Starborn and Coalesced to some degree. Hey guys, Domir, patron of the show. Thank you very much, Domir. They want to know: would you rather be Coalesced or Starborn? Let's make it quick because we got a lot of ground to cover. But real quick, around the horn, Paul, would you rather be Coalesced or Starborn?
I would rather be Coalesced because I think you get better food.
Okay, cool. Eric, Starborn or Coalesced?
Coalesced. They say that because they're outside of Azir, they're freer thinkers and more artistic.
Oh, okay. Well, that sounds terrible. Phil, Coalesced or Starborn?
I'll say Starborn because they get to fly around in cool ships.
You're darn right. Starborn is the right answer. What are you talking about? You hanging out in his ear? You're just absorbing, like, you're basically in heaven, right? Like
Recycled air.
Yeah, that's my favorite type of bear. Thank you.
Yeah.
You have walls on your jungle. I mean, come on, you're a caged animal, just raging against the machine, literally.
Yeah, you just summed up my life, man.
Never has to go outside. Has everything he needs right inside that starship.
That's true for him. Like it's literally a basement in the sky.
And if I cared, I built my own inside jungle, man. Like if it mattered to me, I would I just go walk into that.
It's a spaceman.
Yeah. How many trees have you built to create this jungle in your basement? I mean, just think about where it would be if you had a jungle in the basement.
Okay,
it'd be great.
Enough. Next, let's talk about the old ones, and we scratched a slight surface on it, but we're going to dive into it now because this is a brand new thing. Sure. I think it's one of the most interesting parts of the book. Sagemut 14. They ask, how many old ones are named in this book? Good question. Maybe it's as if you knew that this was coming. I don't know how you could have. They spend time talking about the old ones. I knew nothing about the old ones before we walked into this one, but they rattled off like 6 old ones, and they talk, they talk at length about them. I didn't ask you guys before this episode to bring up or like to think about who your favorites are, but this is I love a list, and I love picking favorites out of a list. And so maybe off the cuff, I might ask you guys if you had any favorites of these old ones that you wanted to chat about. I cut you off, Paul, so keep going if you want to run with it.
So normally I would say all the old ones, but it's Sage King, so I know he would know exactly how many old ones there are and that we're missing some.
Sure.
But my favorite old one is definitely going to be Sotek. He's always been my favorite old one because he is the old one of the skinks.
Pause real quick because Darth Alec asked a question about it too. So Sagemut was asking all about all the old ones. Darth Alec asked about Sotek specifically, saying, "What's their relationship to Sotek now? Is he a god, an old one, gone, etc., etc.?" Keep going, Paul. Go.
No, he is definitely not gone. He is completely revived. I mean, you can't have that awesome Storm of Chaos priest, skink priest that they had, where he had all the snakes and stuff. But beyond that, yes, he's definitely still here. He is giving his blessing to so many different skinks. It's amazing. It's not the Southlands, but it's super cool. And I think it will hopefully show up to be something similar in the future. For all those who don't know what I'm talking about, it's from Warhammer Fantasy Battles and the Southlands where the Slann didn't exist and the Saurus were super rare. So it was skink-only society. And so that's always been my favorite flavor of Seraphon. So...
what do we know about Sotek though, as a person, like a deity or a thing? What are some of their hallmarks?
The big thing is that all of the skinks that are born under his sign have red crests. So in Storm of Chaos, you got all these rules for different crests, and the red crests were specifically the ones that were for the skinks. So Sotek believes that sacrifice and blood are necessary to grease the Great Plan's mechanisms. So ironically, for the smallest thing in the army, you have to kill the most things. So some even view Decrothian as an aspect of Sotek born from his molted skin. Like, how cool is that statement? I love that statement. And as always, he hates the Horn Rat because in Lustria, he was going after Skaven. And you know what? It's the Middle Realms. And you know what he's doing? Still going after Skaven. So he's the same good old Sotek. So yes, he's definitely still around. He's definitely still cool. I'm done.
Yeah, the book makes it a point to say, because Darth was asking specifically, is he a god, an old one? What do we think he is? It says that he is not considered to be an old one, in fact, but rather he's the embodiment of like the Seraphon race, is the way I'm like an incarnated soul of the Seraphon. So, I mean, is that better or worse than old one? I guess I don't know what the hierarchy is, but like it really seems like he's got primacy amongst all the other like old one. I feel like old one and deities to some degree like starting to become synonymous, but this is like almost a separate. He's set apart because of his role.
He's worshipped more by the skinks.
Yeah, Aaron is going to try and walk this back, but I'm going to go in full fledged. He is an old one, flat and 100%. Even though Aaron is reading directly from the Battletome.
I quote.
This is not unreliable narrator. This is.
This is just Paul theory.
Not considered. So I mean, there's some wiggle room there. He's not considered to be an old one. So who's to say? Who's doing the considering? My favorite part for like the Skaven animosity is like Skaven have like an like it's in their DNA that whenever they see the red crest, they're very afraid. Like it's baked into their their instincts generationally to be afraid of the red crest, which is cool.
Which is kind of interesting that would carry over for the Skaven from the old world. I don't think we usually talk a lot about other races in the Age of Sigmar carrying anything over from the old world. But if they remember Sotek somehow in their DNA, like, then that must have carried over.
Yep.
Very well could be. Yeah. A primal dread, which is interesting. And it's also worth noting that the skinks think that since this age of beast is very, ferocious and primal and whatever, they think this is a Sotek like awakening and driving, a certain element of this ferociousness out in the world. It's good. The battle will reach new heights. Other old ones that you guys want to talk about?
I'll throw Huanchi up there because with the Hunters of Huanchi, I just thought it was like, cool name, but turns out Huanchi is the predator. And is the god of stealth and secretness, secretivity, if that's even a word. And they talk about the chameleon skinks embodying and worshiping Huanchi above all. It says he takes the form of kind of a panther-like hunter, which is interesting that it's a non-reptilian god. I'm sure you could probably create. We got Dracolines, which are sort of like lizard cats. So maybe it's like that. Hey, that'd be kind of a cool thing to add to the army too. Yeah, but their primary temples are nestled deep within the shade forest of Ulgu. They're very Ulgu-y. And so yeah, that's kind of cool that this one's not as broad as Sotek. But has a very kind of niche specific space that we've seen that introduced through Warcry, and now we're seeing it here.
Phil, I hate to put you on the spot, but did you have an old one that, besides Sotek probably, that you were drawn to or you found interesting?
Well, I find them all very interesting. I think all of this is very fresh lore, so it's cool to see it sort of given more time here. But I have always liked a lot of the bigger dinos in the army, and Itzel, the tamer, is the old one who is connected most with the mounts that the Seraphon use. And so he is described as being the most bestial of the old ones. And so he is most popular in Gur, and they even say that he is accepted as a minor deity by the resurgent Draconith. So interesting little tie-in there. And he is seen to be a protector god against the Drogruk. So some cool retconning there for the Draconith, and always fun to have some nice story tie-ins if you wanted to do some Path to Glory stuff where you were able to justify, like, well, why does this army have all these, dinosaur monsters instead of a whole bunch of skinks or something? And it's like, well, they follow Itzel, and, it adds that extra layer for the army where you can sort of ground them and say, like, they're doing this thing because of X, and X has a name, and I can point to a thing in the book to justify why my army does what they do. Which I think is something that all the armies need, because being able to write compelling stories has to have grounds in some sort of rooting in the world. And I feel like until now, a lot of the Seraphon were kind of abstract. It was hard to have very well thought out stories for them.
Yeah, true. The one I'll bring up, maybe even my favorite, it's tough to say, is Chotek, the Invigorator. One of the new units, and we'll talk about later, is the Spawn of Chotek, which is the fire-breathing replacement for
Salamander.
the salamander. But the reason this is interesting to me is that he's a patron of sort of the Lord of the Sun, bringer of day. So it is bright things, basically, which is an element that I don't know, isn't necessarily as focused on, I think, as the army up until sort of bringing up Chotek currently, has an affinity, or his followers have an affinity towards sometimes Hish, but a lot more Axian, which reminds me of how Huanchi is sort of related to Olgu to some degree, right? There's the shared elements. And so Chotek related to Akshi, which I really love having these deities who are not explicitly of the realms or related to specific realms, but I love when things match. I love when there's, patterns and things of that nature. So Chotek really stands out to me as another example of that. His followers love gold. We were talking about gold earlier, not because it's worth anything, because who cares, but like it just is shiny and bright. And I don't really think of Seraphon as like, dullers who just like shiny things, but like it because it reflects light and brightness, is that's why they it sort of factors into their worship of this guy. And they're orange, which contributes to the coloring of what we're talking about, this brightness, and they have a bit of a pyro element as well, the pyromantic arts, which I'm a big fan of as well. So I think this is a cool one. Sagemut's question was how many old ones are named. There's actually 6 of them in the book. They also, I'm just going to keep going so we can get through it. They also mentioned Quetzal the Preserver, who's more of as a protector deity for the Seraphon. And there's Tepak the Seer, which I think is sort of the magic mystic one, who has like I don't know how to say, a quaddle view as well. So this flying feathered snake as well. So
there's a brief mention that Quetzal might have a brother, Quetli, the keeper of future paths, but it's disputed. So that's unreliable narrator.
The only deal in the concrete facts here on the mortal realms. So, these are 6 more old ones that I knew before. There's even more than this, but it's a great introduction to the old ones. Did you guys have more thoughts?
I think all these names are directly, we know some of them are coming from the old world, but I think all of these actually just come straight out of the old world lore and are just being reseeded into the Age of Sigmar, which is nice to be able to just say like, hey, this is basically the same army as it used to be. Like it's got new elements, but it's still the same guys on the ground, same belief structures and stuff.
I was going to say boots on the ground, but they've never wore a boot in their life.
I think what they're really doing is they're bringing in the old to restabilize the new, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. And to me, that's a great way of grounding the army, right? Because if there was one thing that I think this army
coalescing it even,
they're coalescing it, right, or coalescing, depending on your perspective, is they did need to have a more firm grip on the realms. And I think including the old ones, including just all these other little stories really does that. And I think it's great and awesome. So.
Sure. All right. Talked about sort of their culture, their society a little bit. Do we have anything to add on how they interact with the realms, how they venture forth in the realms, interface with the realms at all? Anything new that this book brings that we haven't seen before that you guys want to talk about?
I think this is maybe a good place to mention they sort of made more reference to spawning pools again. Which I know I briefly mentioned before, but so for folks who don't know, in the old world, all of the temples had these magical pools inside the cities that were used to create new Seraphon. And so each group of Seraphon was, I guess, created in a spawning from these spawning pools. And so they come out in batches and are tied together because they're all of the same spawning. And they go back to that. They make mention of it. And they also say that the new spawnings are particularly vicious because they're being imbued, almost uncontrollably with Gur magic. And so we ended up getting some new creatures being created Some of the eggs that they've had on ships are now able to be hatched that previously they couldn't hatch because they're being imbued with the magic from Gur. And so it adds, again, like Paul was saying, it grounds them again, gives them a more structured, like, where do these things come from? Well, we now know exactly where they come from, how they're coming into being, why they're the way they are, and where some of these new models are coming from, because it's like, well, why do they all of a sudden have these new things? Well, because of the Gur magic and the eggs that they previously couldn't hatch.
Yep. And there was also one specific unit entry had mentioned that, oh yeah, no, there was just this extra room that opened up in all of the spaceships. Like, oh, yep, there's that door open now. I guess we're getting a new unit type from there. But like, I'm reducing it. Like, the lore is actually super cool because it reinforces the old ones as the reason for why this race exists. What it does is it creates a believable narrative as to why things would just appear without knowing why they're appearing, right? So
I mean, I'll reemphasize part of the lore is that they are in the heavens seeking these different pieces of lost old one artifacts and stuff. And one of the things they talk about is in the heavens called the incandescent sphere, is in the upper heavens of Azir, and it's this relic of the absent gods that they're trying to repair, and it definitely looks like what's the big Slan model? Is it the Croak? One where it has all the circular stones like rotating around it.
Around it.
Yeah. So it's like a gigantic version of that. I'm assuming bigger than even the Sigmarillium. So they're going after these different things. And I do also love the idea that like their temple ships, they probably have some things that like that the Slan don't know how to operate. If there's anything in there that is old one technology, or the combination long lost because they've lost a ton of memory that's been cut out. And so to have some things kind of unlock or come back into kind of use, I like that a lot for these guys.
Yeah, agreed. All right, cool. As far as the allies and enemies go, I don't know that there's been too much change, but I'll say, hey, do you guys have any new allies or new enemies for the Seraphon that we didn't know about before previously?
I mean, the Draconeth.
Yeah, good ally. Okay, good.
That was definitely not in the last Battletome. So
yeah, Dragoneth didn't exist yet in the last Battletome. So
I'll say they were probably always allies of the cities of Sigmar, but maybe more specifically, or like present day, is Dawnbringer Crusade, which is, I mean, for all intents and purposes, the same thing, but it's a cities of Sigmar on the move, and that I think is a new allyship that we're seeing a little bit in this new era as well.
It's a jazzercising city of Sigmar. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly right. As far as enemies go, do you think there's any new enemies besides everyone who's against the Great Plan?
They definitely spend a lot of time talking about Kragnos and like all of the giant waw that he started, and how like that is now kind of a focus because that's a big enough problem that they have to sort of take a break from chaos to deal with all this destruction.
I'm blanking. At the end of the Broken Realms Kragnos, he gets tricked into chasing, like running into a portal, right?
Yep.
And that's by the Seraphon, correct?
Yeah.
And then do we get any resolution to where they took him?
Yeah. A little bit later, we find out from the Slaves of Darkness Battletome, they shipped him off to a chaos fortress, and he wrecked house so much so that it distracted Archeon. And did Archeon have to go and like clean up after the fact? Like he missed Kragnos, but like he distracted Archeon and missed Archeon's plans. And so like Archeon took an L essentially because on his watch, this fortress got wrecked. And so everybody's like, well, is Archeon that great? Like if he couldn't even like, this fortress got destroyed. And so that was like, Be'lakor is like, sweet. I look better now because of that. So,
well,
hey, listeners, if you want to find out more about that, and then listen to the Slaves to Darkness Battletome from a few episodes ago.
Exactly. Be'lakor is a new enemy since the last Battletome as well. And Be'lakor is more interesting as an enemy for the Seraphon because he doesn't have a power base, right? He can show up wherever, whenever, and specifically because his cursed guys are messing with them as well, right? Like, so.
Yeah, true.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. Let's get to the stuff that people want to know more about, which is to say there's a bunch of new units in this book, and folks want to hear about them, and I want to tell them about them. So there's, 7 or so new entries or new models out there that are probably worth talking about.
That's a lot.
This is why I wasn't going to do this Battletome if it wasn't for all these new model entries. So did you guys have any favorites? Maybe if we go quick enough, we can do all of them, but only if we go quick. But please talk to me about some of your favorite new ones that are out and about that you want to chat.
And I got one. Raptidon Chargers. They're awesome because they're Teechi-Hoochi's raiders from the old world, which were the Cold One riders that were skinks, but now they're on chickens, and they're awesome. And thank you for giving them back to me because they're amazing and fantastic. So I love them.
To you specifically. Yeah, no one else can have them.
Exactly. That's what I heard.
But tell me their lore. People want to know what they are.
So they are the ones that have the javelin. So they're the feisty skinks. They are the what do they call them? They call them specifically the paladins of Sotek. Like, I mean, for a skink to be a paladin of Sotek, like, he's got to have a lot of confidence, right? And a massive amount of confidence in that Raptidon to pull the weight for him, 95% of the weight. But I've always loved Teechi-Hoochi's raiders. I have several boxes of them, and I still have a Seraphon army for the old world that has them in it. So they're a cool idea. I'm glad they remade them with even better models. So they actually have a cool thing, which is going to touch on the other unit, the other Raptidon hunters, where they actually synergize super well. I know we don't usually talk about rules, but it's super cool that they've kind of combined them into a...
He said we can't get to all of them unless we keep it short.
Super effective.
Thinking it in my brain.
Yeah. So there's one shooty one and there's one combat one. That's about as far as I'm going to get in the rules. And the shooty one shoots and then the combat one is better. So yes, please, and thank you.
Yeah. Sure. They do say that the things that they ride, the Raptidons, are equal in intelligence as the skinks, and they work together. They communicate in clicks, but when they need to be dead silent, they communicate with changing colors in their feathers so that they can communicate with each other. And it's kind of like the whatchamacallits in Jurassic Park, right? That can kind of the raptors.
Weren't some of the new things? Wasn't something telepathic in here too? Or was it these guys or something else that were literally?
The skink spawning groups can have a telepathic link.
Yeah. But the thing is, I'm not sure if saying they're as smart as Raptidons is making Raptidons smarter or making skinks dumber. I just wasn't sure which one of those ones it was, but I'll take it either way.
Yeah.
Very cool. And it's worth noting these mounts are examples of those dinosaurs that couldn't be hatched before the Gersh magic, but the Gersh magic has made it such that now these eggs that they couldn't do anything with all of a sudden are hatching, or they were discovered in some sealed vault that now popped out. This is some of those examples. Other units that you guys want to talk about?
So I guess the other mounts that couldn't be hatched previously are the Agrodons. So these are the I guess Saurus equivalent of mounts that are newly hatched, and these things sound kind of horrible. Actually, they're super raged out all the time, and they can't hardly be controlled except by very specific Saurus who are spawned sort of alongside them to be able to control them. And so they are hyper aggressive mount.
Aggro.
I mean, literally, it's in the name. It's very on the nose. And so it's sort of just point them in the right direction, because once these things get going, they're very hard to stop. And I didn't look super closely at the rules, but that I believe is kind of reflected in their rules a little bit, which is cool. I mean, I like it when the rules are tied to the lore and not just hey, here's some numbers on a spreadsheet.
Yeah, very cool. These mounts are also used not only just by Saurus, who are the Agrodon Lancers, but then also serves as mounts for Scar veterans who, I mean, if if you're willing to ride a Carnosaur, but also really willing to ride an Agrodon, it really speaks to the ferocity of this thing. Related to the Agrodon Lancers, patron of the show, Will Lawless, thank you, Will, had a question. Assuming the Soros Knights have actually been replaced by Agrodon Lancers, is there any allusion to it in the lore at all? Any reference to old knights going away or cold ones or anything of that nature? Guys, am I blind or is it strictly from the record?
It is just
it's a cold shoulder to the cold ones.
Yeah,
there you go.
There's not a single reference, which is hilarious, I think. They're just expunged from the records. They never existed.
Yeah, that's a little too bad. I mean, they were derpy looking, but still.
Yeah.
I mean,
speaking of which, there's another unit that's expunged from the record. The Razordon.
Yeah. Razordons are gone completely. They just don't even have a replacement. They're just gone.
No, and it's weird to me because the spawn of Showtech could be a dual kit, but it's not.
Nope.
So, yeah.
Unfortunately, I hate dual kits. But it's funny that we actually get Eric on the show, who I believe last time he was on the show bemoaned the removal of lore from Battletomes. Now, this is a removal of a unit, but with removal of unit comes removal of lore. Yet another example of them taking stuff away, which is, I don't know if it was a pet peeve of yours, but at least I knew you brought it up. So,
it was just in that case, there's a piece of lore that I thought was pretty cool that we had lost in that iteration. So, in this case, it's probably hard to explain away. We had cold ones, now we have Agrodons. It's one of those is hey, just buy in. We're just moving forward.
Yeah. Or the Agrodons ate all the cold ones.
Try not to worry about it too much, guys. We needed to move the model line forward, so this is just how it is now.
They fed the cold ones to the.
They ate them. Yeah.
All right, there we go. You heard it here first, folks.
The only regret I have is that the Razordon was the ankylosaur, right? Of the dinosaur people. So we don't have an ankylosaur anymore, and I miss the ankylosaur.
Isn't that the Bastillodon?
Bastillodon is an ankylosaur.
No, it's not spiky enough. It's not spiky enough.
Well,
what? No.
Bastillodon my dinosaur nerd coming out. Sorry. I mean, where are the swimming dinosaurs? We need those models released. Never mind.
All right, and Darth Alec had also asked where the cold ones went, and they're gone. So there's that. I'm checking off the list. What else do we got left?
Croxagore.
Yeah, there you go.
We've got two types. We've got kind of a sleeker Croxagore that sort of looks, I would say, more like a Gila monster head, and then the other one has much more of a longer croc head, which is pretty cool. They're the Croxagore and the Croxagore Warspawn. It's one of the things that says that the Croxagore, they're big, bulky, sometimes the laborers of the group. They can bite down use their teeth as equally as they can use these big star clubs. It seems to imply that the Croxagore are more in the Starborn and the Warspawn are more in the Coalesced. There's a little bit of that feel to it. The Warspawn seem to be a little bit bigger, a little bit beefier.
They are, and the Warspawn are specifically spawned just for war. They do nothing else.
Oh, the name makes sense then. Okay.
Yeah, and they also have specific, or they have to even have specific skink attendants because literally they do nothing else but fight. So they don't even clean themselves or feed themselves. They just fight. So they have this whole coterie of little skinks who clean them up after battle and feed them and decorate them
like prize fighters.
And they even have a little mention in the lore, which I thought was super cool, and they actually have it in the painting as well, that some of these skink attendants will then paint them with their little handprints and mark their Warspawn as theirs and sort of bling them out before they go into battle, which is just a very fascinating little tidbit, and it calls back to the sort of symbiotic nature from the old world of Croxagore having to be directed by skinks because Croxagore were the big dumb laborers that built all the temple cities.
Yep.
Yeah, that's cool.
How appropriate it is that we finally have Crocs in Croxagore. I mean,
yeah,
it's fun.
Actually look like alligators.
Yeah. Also, the naming convention of gore, right? But in lizardmen, Croxagore, but we've got the Horseman, Croxagore, and stuff. That's cool. I like it.
Yeah, like an ogre, Croxagore.
Yeah.
Ungore.
Yeah.
Ungore.
Just gore. Yeah.
I know we don't usually talk a lot about models, but the pictures of the Croxagore make them look like they must be absolutely gigantic.
Yep.
Like when you see them up against other models in the line, it's like they're twice as big as like warriors, or maybe even bigger than that.
I was thinking like rock gut trolls.
Yeah, they're like troll size, which is pretty nuts. Think how massive that is for something that's previously was like just slightly beefier than a regular Saurus.
Got to get those size up.
What do we got left on our list here?
Spawn of Chotek. It's the only thing left.
Tell me about them.
Yeah, they're just salamander replacements. They're fancy salamander replacements. They, just like the old salamanders, they've got like this acid spit that ignites on contact with the air, and so they breathe fire. But they have, again, the references to the special spawning, and then they have skink attendants who are also spawned to go alongside them, and they have different shaped frills from regular skinks, so that they know that they're like blessed by Chotek to be able to work with the salamanders. And then for whatever reason, while they don't do this with all the other animals that they spawn, for the spawn of Chotek, they implant Seraphon technology into their brains so that they can telepathically control them, which is sort of begs the question, why aren't you doing that with all the rest of these things?
It's really like Avatar based, right? Where you can like mind meld with your beast.
It seems very strange that like, we've got these agrodons that basically will eat other Seraphon that get too close to them, and we can't control them, but we'll just implant chips into the brains of these things and telepathically control them.
I thought it was interesting that since these are creatures like of actually predominantly spawned there or what have you, folks think that somehow they're related to like Volcatrix, whether they're like descendants of or some relation to, even though we know that that's not the case. Volcatrix being the mother of salamanders, which is a fun connection. You can't have salamanders running around if there's a mother of salamanders unrelated to them. But fire slayers go around trying to like kill these things because it's like a trial by fire, I guess, trial by combat to like defeat these creatures, which I thought was fun. Very neat. There's also the Hunters of Huanti, but I feel like we talked a little bit about those, especially when we were talking about the old one. Yep, so I think we're good there. Now is the time where I would normally ask about the sub-factions. However, I would say that they haven't changed all that much from previous iterations. Maybe there's a sprinkling of like, their reaction to modern day Age of Beast type stuff. However, there was a question just generally from Darth Alec asking about whether or not the book expands how Seraphon temples and free cities work. I don't know that it has expanded all that much, but one thing that jumped out at me that I don't think I've ever read before was a very an explicit relation or like a comparison between the skinks of the Fangs of Sotek, which is the subfaction that is predominantly skinks following Sotek, who are the most likely to be found in the free cities of Sigmar. Comparison between those skinks and those civilizations, and then the Daughters of Cain, in that both sides seem to like kill a bunch of people all the time and like try to blame it on each other or blame it on chaos or blame it on some other thing. And it's almost as if each side has a begrudging acknowledgement of the other, saying, I know you're doing it for whatever your purposes are. And as long as you don't get in my way, you can kill indiscriminately. And so it's sort of fun to see that both of those cultures have infiltrated, good Sigmar-fearing civilizations and are, killing to further their own ends. And so it's a comparison that I probably would have made in my head is me giving myself probably too much credit, but the fact that they call it out is noteworthy. And it's very similar themes there, which I thought was neat.
I will also say that I'll walk that back slightly in the fact that they say that the Fangs of Sotek skinks have these pylons that they put in their embassies that make them bigger on the inside. So they got this like Doctor Who skink thing going on, where they travel through space and time, and they have these massive things. Yeah, exactly. So
sure. As far as special characters go, there aren't too many, and I feel like we spent a lot of time talking about Lord Croak, the special character. Some might say like the most important special character of all time, or at the very least, the oldest special character. The one other unique element to this book that didn't exist from the last one, and we'll bring it up now, especially because we've got Phil on the line, are the Starblood Stalkers. Phil, is there anything you want to bring up about the Stalkers here?
I mean, I guess for folks who don't know, the Starblood Stalkers are a group of mostly skinks led by a skink priest, Kishitaka, who is sent with alongside one Saurus Old Blood. They specifically called him in this lore, which is pretty substantial in the sense that Old Bloods are like the oldest Saurus that are basically generals at this point. So attaching a Saurus general to this group seems significant, but they were sent off to the Mountain of Beastgrave in Gur to try and stop the mountain from being corrupted by chaos. I guess technically they succeeded, and because the mountain is dead now. So, I mean, they didn't specifically do that, but it is no longer a problem. So I guess
sometimes some problems just solve themselves, Phil.
Yeah. Chaos didn't win, and that's what matters.
Delegation is super important. That's all it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know why I'm remembering this now, but they mention in the Old Blood unit entry that Saurus have a like genetic memory that unlocks more as they get older and like gain the capacity to manage all of those thoughts. One of the old ones basically imbued all the Saurus with like all of his tactical knowledge, and it was too much for them, and they basically all kind of went insane. And so he's like, well, wait a minute, I guess I need to like put some blockers on this. And so as they age, they like unlock new knowledge that has been inside them all along, and they just gain access to it. And so
so many layers of unlocking.
Yeah, the distinction of like Scar veterans versus Old Bloods is like how much of their genetic memory they've unlocked. And they just made mention quickly in the unit entry of just like how in battle, like they don't actually know why they're directing their other Saurus to do the things that they're doing, but they know that it's the right thing to do, and they like have an instinctual knowledge of war rather than a like learned knowledge, which I think is really interesting. That their generals, it's not that they're like super gifted or super learned. They just have an innate sense of how to fight battles.
Nice.
Tangent, but I don't know, popped in my head there.
Sure. Yeah, it's a cool tangent. As far as the Stalkers go, it's since their mission was successful, the book makes it a point to say, and so because of that, people see them all the time. They're just out and about, like running errands and stuff, and like doing working on unknown missions. And so I feel like one of the hallmarks of Shadespire was that so many things were like trapped in Shadespire for the longest time. But like now we're seeing war bands all over the place, like escaping, going, living their lives, and like making their mark on the moral realms at large. And this is another example of the Stalkers, like just doing their thing.
Yeah. Not sure how I feel about that.
I was just gonna say, I don't love it. I like the idea of things just being stuck all the time. That was a cool like narrative hook, but I don't get to say.
So real quick, is that guy the only Old Blood then?
No.
Is Old Blood still a unit entry?
Old Bloods are all like the general level Saurus are all Old Bloods. So it's a very generic term. There are many. Not as many as all Saurus, but there are quite a few. And then there's
what were it's the Scar Vets that we used to have, that single model of a Scar Vet with the big shield, right?
That was actually another unit that's gone now. It's the Sunblood.
Sunblood, there.
Yeah, which
there's a Scar Vet on Counterstore.
There is.
And Scar Vet on Agridon. But the
true.
Sunblood was a standalone model. It was just like a supersized, super strong Saurus, which was a replacement of an old world named character. When we came into Age of Sigmar, they were like, we need a more generic term for what this guy is. And now he's just gone forever. Super cool model, though. You could probably still use him as an Old Blood or a Scar veteran if you wanted to.
Sure.
Yeah, and so one of the new models is one of the new models in this book is an Old Blood, is a new sculpt. But at any rate, all right. Do you guys have other things that you want to talk about before we get to some more listener questions?
Just because there's another thing that I remembered about Kroxigor, and I think the Kroxigor Warspawn are super cool. There's an entry about a Kroxigor Warspawn where the rest of the Saurus and Seraphon that were like a part of that war party doing whatever they were doing got wiped out or whatever, or left, and there was this Kroxigor Warspawn who was left behind, but without anybody to help him do anything or direct him to do anything. All he could do is just stand there. And so it just makes mention of like how they really have no agency by themselves. And so he would just stand in one spot, completely motionless, like collecting dust over hundreds of years and like plants growing over the top of him. But like every so often something would get close enough to activate sort of that war, I don't know, mode that they have. And so then he would just like go nuts and like eat them, and then go back to just standing completely motionless for the next, however long, until something else just wandered by. And it's just kind of really rooting these specific units in the world of like, this is how these things work, and they're very weird and very different, and they don't have any sort of agency. They're just all instinct.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Very neat. Now we're going to do some listener questions that I didn't find good spots for up above. And we're gonna go through them real quick. Like, first things first. Here's an easy one. Here's a gimme one, and it's from two different people, similar question. Tyrael and patron of the show, Demir. They both wanted to know what dino would be your personal mount. If you had to pick a mount in the Seraphon range, what would you be riding right now?
Easy. Stegodon. Thing of the gods, because imagine putting a hammock on that and walking through the forest and just the sway back and forth. Mm-hmm. Heck yeah.
Nice.
That's what I do.
Very cool. Hey, Paul, what mount would you be riding?
I mean, I'd probably be riding an Agrodon, just because like you just hang on and like just go flying all over the place. Be great.
Yeah, that's true. Hey, Phil, what kind of mount would you be mounting?
So torn, because I think it would just be super cool to ride on a Carnosaur, but that might be a little scary. Pterodon could also be very fun, because getting the ability to fly around and do cool stuff, and it's probably not as likely to eat you either. So bonus.
I like the idea of also riding a Raptidon, because they seem pretty smart, and they'd get me out of trouble, I think, as well. I'd be like, hey man, let's boogie on out of here. They seem like maybe they're possibly the fastest, right? Which means I can run the opposite direction from danger.
Yeah, they certainly look fast.
Yeah. With the frill. Anyways, that's cool. Good question. Patron of the show, Armoire Enthusiast. That's Mike, right? Do I get the names right? Okay. He wants to know, if you had to use only one of the new models and its lore to try to convince someone to play Seraphon as a faction, which one would it be and why? Good question. First come, first serve. Who's got a unit in mind, or a model in mind, visually and lore based, that you would use to convince someone to play this faction? Who's got one?
I'm gonna go with Stegodon. It's just a great kit. It's from the golden age of kits, where you had kits that did so many different things. So this is a tri kit. So you can do an Engine of the Gods, or you can do the basic crossbow, or you can do the one with the blowpipes, right? And they all have their own thing. And the kit comes with, I think, 6 skinks, but it also comes with a skink priest and a skink chief. So like it just informs all the rest of your army, and I think it's super awesome kit.
Did that one always have 3 war scrolls? Because now I have a chief war scroll.
So
Yes,
yeah,
did.
it had a lesser Stegodon, or I don't remember what the term was, but there was a young Stegodon, an old Stegodon, and then an old Stegodon with a priest, and then an old Stegodon with a chief. So, and I remember the days of running a Southlands list with a Stegodon helm and you just ran into everything and did double impact hits, and it was amazing.
Phil or Eric, what model would you use? You could only use one. What would you use?
Go ahead, Phil.
So this is an interesting question in that I think if you were to convince someone to play the faction, you'd have to kind of know the person's personality and be like, hey, this thing. So I'll cheat a little bit and say I'd use the model, because it's such a large model range, I'd use the model that I think would be most aligned with that person's, like, the thing that they want to do. But personally, I would use something like Aslan or Lord Croak, because I don't know, it gives you this sense of like, this is the focal point of the armies. Like, yes, we've got the Saurus and the monsters and the Kroxigor and the Skinks, and they're all doing these things, but they're all being directed by this guy, and he's in control, and he's the main thing. And you pretty much always want to build your army around one of these. So get used to the magic and the majesty of the fat frog.
Sure. Eric, what do you think?
I mean, the Carnosaur is the one that always kind of pulls on me. Though those new the Raptidons are just super cool. But yeah, the Carnosaur kind of was probably what I'd be like. And I'd make the monster, the dinosaur noises, and stomp it around, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna agree with the Carnosaur. That's my answer too, because I think one of the more compelling reasons to play this army is it's big dinosaurs, and when people think of dinosaurs, they think of T-Rexes. I mean,
They
the
do.
closest thing you're going to get to a T-Rex is a Carnosaur. So you're gonna say, hey, you want to play an army full of dinosaurs? Here's the dinosaur that you think of when you think of dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
I just use the word dinosaurs a lot right there. But it's the Seraphon Battletome. What else is there? So I think that's like the quintessential. I mean, the Slan 2 or Lord Croak, but like those are a little not abstract, but they're tangent. I mean, they're focal points, but also tangential to like the rest of the theme. Like everything else is squarely a prehistoric creature. So that's why Carnosaur.
I would also answer this question in a way that Mike did not ask, which is how would I get him to play the army? I would tell him to go read the 5th and 6th edition Lizardman army, because they are chock full of terrible puns, and I think he would love that. So
yeah,
that's good.
They definitely used to be like a very much a joke army.
Yeah,
where like every single name was some sort of like, if you pronounce it the right way, you can tell that this is actually a joke. And
he didn't want to play with Teeny Weeny.
Yeah, right.
Another question, Chrisling asks, anything new about the inhabitants of the Etheric Void? I believe the only reference I saw of the Etheric Void was that when Lord Croak was gone for a while, the Seraphon were fighting these like creatures in the Void. In this case, one of them was named the 7-headed beast of the Urson cluster, very sci-fi. And then Lord Croak appeared out of nowhere, materialized and like threw a star at it and like destroyed it. And then he disappeared again. And so I think there's one or two other creatures that like were depicted in a mosaic. So
Croak's having a lot of fun with his comeback tour.
Yeah.
He just pieces out. It doesn't, although they talk about flying through the void a lot, it doesn't really talk about much what that means or what that looks like. I feel like it really did. The book focuses more on the realms themselves, which makes sense. I think that is on purpose and needed. Not so much a sci-fi like spaceship Star Wars type story, but it's mentioned. There are weird things out there, that's for sure. Lichcast, patron of the show, thank you, Lichcast, also has a question. Warcry Hardiger showed us some of the cool science fantasy technology of the Seraphon. Any more of that here? Did any of that stuff jump out at you guys that you feel like are worth sharing with Lichcast?
So one of the things was the war spawn that are the Starborn. When they're not in battle, they literally just put in suspended animation, which I thought was kind of cool. Just like, I'm not even going to deal with you. Just go stand there.
Yeah. And we've mentioned a number of other things that have already kind of come up organically, but one that is mentioned, and I thought maybe there was some question about it somewhere else, and maybe we just missed it. But there's talk of portals that they use from the ships onto the Starborn actually make their armies show up in the realms through portal technology, not dissimilar to the realm gates. And I think they also have mention of Slann being able to affect realm gates, and either temporarily or permanently move them, so that it's like, hey, I need to stop this invasion of this place, so I am going to redirect this realm gate so that a chaos army can't use it to attack here.
There's actually quite a bit of just like little tidbits about the different technologies on the temple ships, everything from how they operate in the void to how they operate when they are terraforming and that sort of stuff. So there's, I mean, like, for instance, they when they're going to land, they disintegrate a bunch of the earth below them, shoot it up into the sky so that they can half bury the ship in the ground, like things like that. So there's a lot of different stuff that they do talk about. There's a couple pages worth of things. It would be another probably 30 minutes if we went through and started talking about all that.
Yeah. The Raptidon chargers, their lances like shoot blasts of energy, and that's very much like old world technology.
I love that when they would bury this temple city into the crust of the realm, they would literally transport it up into the sky and then would form comets, and it'd be like, oh, they're making a new city. Hey, look at those guys, they're making a new city over there. They got fireworks.
Yeah, it seemed a little a bit of a tell.
And
you kind of give it away.
Of which, there were a couple of other lines in here that were intentionally amusing, to the point where they were talking about, I don't know if it was the war spawn or the spawn of Shotek, and they were like, hey, they do this, and also they eat a bunch of skinks, which they found out super immediately after they tried it for the first time. Like, there were a decent amount of jokes in this one, which was I liked a lot.
Yeah, delicious.
Yeah, a lot of little skinks getting munched by these new monsters. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, do skinks taste like chicken? Is the real question.
All right. Maybe the final question I'll ask now, which I think is a good capstone. Another one from Darth Alec. He had a lot of good ones, and we didn't get to all of them. But he asks, do they, meaning the Seraphon, do they feel like a functional society now? And maybe to recontextualize a little bit, I feel like over the years people haven't thought, and in fact, maybe even one of us said it tonight, that we weren't sure that historically Seraphon really felt like a fully fleshed out, complete, like concrete faction, or race or society or what have you. I think Darth Alec is asking, hey, third go around, has that any of that changed for the Seraphon? Does it seem like it's a more complete, fleshed out unit? What do you guys think about that? Have we reached full society designation yet?
I think so. It feels like they went very much out of their way to explain some of the more mundane parts of the Seraphon, to try and say, like, yes, they do exist in the world, and they have this way of reproducing, and they have this way of living, and this is how their society is structured, and how they interact with the other factions, and doing some of that story building, I guess, for the lack of a better term, of what are Seraphon? Like, we haven't really done this previously, because it was like, ooh, they're mysterious. And it's like, just saying that a faction's mysterious doesn't make them mysterious.
Are you sure?
It's just kind of annoying.
What if you say nothing else?
Yeah, right. It's like, ooh, here's this thing we're just not going to tell you about. And so I think by making it very clear that, like, once they're coalesced, they have a actual, structure. They live in their city well, it's a temple ship, but they turn it into, like a city, and they live there, and they, have to go hunt and collect food and gather resources and do all the sort of normal stuff that they used to have to do. And then the ones living on the ships, they live very differently, but they still have a structure to their lives and how they function. And we didn't have a lot of that previously. So I would say very much so. And for anybody who plays Seraphon, I think this book will be very welcome, because it'll allow for fleshing out the sort of background of your army, if that's something you care about. I know some people don't, but
everyone does, Phil. Everyone
everybody
listening to this show
100%.
does.
They ought to.
Sure. That was a pretty compelling answer. Does anybody have it? Does anybody want to fight Phil over that? Or any contributing to his thesis? Agree or disagree?
I'll go with the technical. There's no more fine cast.
Nice. You're very pragmatic, and that's what I like about
Very
it.
true. They're all gone now.
All plastic.
Yep.
All plastic. Full.
Complete. And not
any
even
final
any
thoughts about
ugly
that?
plastic.
Any final thoughts about that particular question? Because I agree wholeheartedly, and I have nothing to add with what Phil has said.
I
Good.
concur.
All right.
Nope.
All right, cool. Well, then
All
that
good.
to some degree is almost like a segue into us closing this out, because I'm curious what you guys thought. So it sounds like we agree that we are lizardmen, real boys now, which is to say a real boys society. Nope, lost it. What did you guys think about? What did you guys think about the book as a whole? We'll go in the usual order. Hey, Paul, tell me, review it for me. What did you think of this Battletome?
I would give it a 7 out of 8 spider legs. I thought it was really good.
Ooh.
I also wanted to update your previous statement where you were like the boys society. I'm going to go with the Dead Croak Society.
Okay, sure.
Throw it.
Dead crow. Yeah, okay, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, throw another syllable in there. Cool. Do you have anything to add on your rating, or are we going to...
No, it was
Nice.
good. I like the
I love
artwork.
it.
And then the models are all super fun and new. So like the painting gallery is awesome to look at. So yeah.
Perfect. I think Phil's going to have the most to say, so I'm going to go to Eric next instead.
Yeah. I would say 6 old ones out of 6 because, it's new lore, tons of cool, weird stuff. They go in depth with a lot of new, the range, I don't know, like 30% more or 50, something like that. Like it's really fleshed out, and there's a lot of new toys to play with to make, this army feel even cooler and more diverse on the table. So I like it a lot.
All right, cool. Hey, Phil, what'd you think of the Battletome, man?
Yeah.
The only opinion that matters, frankly. Go ahead.
Certainly the best one for the Seraphon, in my opinion, that we've had so far. I haven't read a lot of the very recent Battletomes, but it feels like they really did a good job with the story in this one too. It's not like, I don't want to rag on Corn Battletomes too much, but it wasn't Corn Battletome, that's for sure. I'll leave it at that. I thought this one did a really nice job of moving us forward. It's not quite like the big story events, but like we have new things to be curious about where we're going next in the overall story. And I think they just, if they could do this level of story detail for every faction going forward, I think people would be ecstatic about that.
Nice.
Jinxed it.
Yeah, right. You just ruined the Age of Sigmar. I appreciate that. Let's see. I gotta find
from here
a numeric rating system.
I've got a theory for you. If it might influence your numbering. What if the old ones are in fact the meta for GW, and the patterns you seek are disrupted in the GW releases because the old ones' plans are not known to everybody?
Hashtag Eric theories.
Whoa.
I have a hard time even absorbing what you just said.
Those were certainly words.
Yeah, those were English. I'm pretty sure. Let's say, I was gonna say 3 out of the 4 like sub factions, but like I want to give it more than a 3.5 out of 4, or 5 out of 6 perhaps. I thought highly of this book. I think if I were to rank the types of Battletomes I like, the best Battletomes are ones where they're brand new armies, right? Where it's like cover to cover brand new stuff that I've never seen before, and that's awesome. But the next best thing is where you take a faction and you expand it as wide as you can by throwing a bunch more in the range and having big impact, or like reflecting on the impact of the present day storyline. And so this checks off a lot of the boxes of things that I'm looking for in a Battletome, which is, say, a bunch of new units, compelling reasons why those units didn't exist before and why they do now. I mean, there's never been the most compelling reasons, but they weren't hatched before, and now the Magic is making them hatch is as good a reason as any. So I'm on board with that. When it comes to the timeline, I want you to spend as much time as possible on one of two things, or maybe both things. It's weird stories and like the reflection on history, weird stories, things that I hadn't thought of, like creative, interesting ways that the faction could work that no one has ever, talked about before. And I want you to focus on the present. I want you to focus on what's going on right now and how is my army reacting to it. And that's exactly what this book does. You got some weird stories in the timeline, and you've got the biggest chunk of the stories that we read are from the Age of Beasts and what it means for the Seraphon, which is fantastic. It doesn't look beyond what we know already from a timeline perspective, but I think we've already settled. I don't know why I even keep bringing it up anymore, but the Battletomes aren't going to do that, and I need to stop expecting that they're going to. Maybe every once in a while they'll give you a little bit of a hint, but even that's not the most common thing. So if I forget about that side of things, and I think there's very little that this book didn't do that I expect a Battletome to do. So I rank it very highly. It's not perfect, again, because I think I would probably reserve that for like something I'd literally never seen before, brand new whole, release ranges and things like that. So all in all, I am for it, and I have nothing to add. So let's not belabor the point. Any final thoughts before we get out of here?
None.
Cool, because here we go. It's time for our reforging, but Sigmar willing, we'll be back soon. Like, subscribe, share, or leave a review. Join us on Discord, drop a tip on our Patreon. Anything you can do will spread the word of Sigmar farther than we can on our own. Chat with us anytime about your thoughts on Twitter at The Mortal Realms. Hey, Paul, where can they find you online?
They can find me at the Path to Story podcast and also at PJ Shard.
Excellent. Phil, where can they find you online?
Could probably find me hanging out with Davy doing some What the Hex podcasting about underworlds, and also if you jump on over to our Discord, usually hanging out there.
Excellent. Eric, where can they find you online?
Rambling about narrative play in the Game of Warcry on Dogs of Warcry podcast, and I'm always on the Discord.
I'm Aaron. You can find me on Twitter at DosAsos, and you can find me on the Pocket Realms podcast found at themortalrealms.com/Patreon or patreon.com/themortalrealms. And you can find all our Mortal Realms shows and content at www.themortalrealms.com. My goal here is not to rehash all those things that we talked about 3 years ago, but just to focus as much as we can on things we find interesting and new stuff, even if we didn't find it interesting, though I bet we did.
I'm only 82% sure what I had for dinner. How do you expect to remember 3 years ago?
I had big goals that I was going to listen to the last episode, but frankly, I can't stand listening to the episodes when I edit them. I can't imagine I'd want to listen to it like it for enjoyment.
Who listens to these episodes?
Hell, I was going to read the notes, and even I couldn't even do that. I couldn't even bring myself to read the notes from last time.
I'm sure we had some really good jokes.
I'm sure, and we had to.
Probably.
Grr. No, here and edit that
out. Lizards, gurn wild.
Wow.
If you say so.
Yeah.
So, or is it more like grr? It's gone wild. No, okay.
Girls gone wild.
I think we're getting further away.
Yeah.
What other stories do you guys want to talk about?